I'm Mark Z, and you're watching Thorin, the best interviewer behind Travis Gafford.
Right, this is going to be episode 23 of Elitists United. Obviously, I'm a big fan, veteran, of numerology. Not, of course, but I'll just say that as a lie for the comedic opening. A big fan of numerology, so I actually like to tie thematically things in with the numbers of things because they represent, I don't know, spirituality or some bullshit. I don't really know what that whole topic's about. But anyway, so obviously episode 23 is very fitting because this week we have Fnatic against Splyce, which is the battle of 2 and 3. I'll leave the people to decide who's 2 and who's 3. So, okay, right, we're here. This is obviously an LEC show. That's why it will have no more than 20,000 viewers and possibly less than 10,000. But we're doing our best, boys. Like the whole region, we're just leveling up as we go. And eventually, they can't deny us forever, Grabbz. One day they'll have to admit we're the best region, the best talk shows. One day it'll happen, I'm sure. It definitely won't be the case that in 3 or 4 more years, people are still watching like CLG versus TSM as though it's the best game in the world. Meanwhile, you know, LCK finals goes like with half the viewership. I don't think that'll happen. I'm an optimistic guy. I believe in people. I think they can learn. Except for the players I hate, who I stick with the narratives from 5 years ago. Anyway, right, I'm just got to be honest with you. You know, you've got to be self-aware when you make these comments, right? Our guests for this episode, pretty well-known people if you follow LEC. In the bottom right-hand corner, we've got Grabbz from G2, who is the coach, allegedly. You never know. It depends what... The problem with his team is they banter so much, you never know now where the banter ends. Like, you don't know if they're just slipping, like, hard truths in there that, you know, you never know at this point in time because they're all just meaning the whole company.
People think that between me and Jankos is fun, but it's not. So,
well, no, that's the interesting thing, isn't it? Like, Jankos is just the sort of person, because he never shuts the fuck up talking, and he always has, like, the same tone. Like, you can't tell whether actually... Like, I've noticed that when he banters, sometimes he does mean it. But he just thinks, if I make it look like banter, they'll think it's fun. It's like... But, like, I always remember the famous incident was where he just bantered with Perkz, and then he blocked Perkz. He got offended by what he said when he got bantered back. It's like, what? If you're going to banter, you can't be blocking him back, bro. Like, what the fuck?
He was young, right? He was young.
Yeah, exactly. He got you. Right, and then the other guest in the bottom left-hand corner is, of course, Youngbuck, or as he calls himself, what is it, the 6-star general? Isn't that the title?
Yeah, it is.
That's pretty good. 6 championships. Not bad.
Yeah.
You're doing all right, Grabbz. You got 1. 5 more to go.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't have Perkz or caps for a long
That's true. Time, so... You got your turn of caps. Yeah, that's fair. Okay. My dream, I'm just going to throw this out there, has nothing to do with the show, but my dream is that the only way Fnatic can truly strike back at G2 is one day in a couple of years, they give the biggest offer ever to Perkz to come and play mid lane for them. And then what you do is you build the whole angle of like, are you just going to let this guy carry you for the whole of your career? Thought you were better than him. Yeah, you do that angle basically. Like, that's the gangster approach. Because obviously, instead of complaining that they took your play, you take their play, don't you? Everyone knows the street rules. That's the way it works, I believe. Just putting it out there. Then again, you know, you have to have a functional Twitter account and basic social media if you want to have that, of course. So, rough times for everyone out in the streets right now. Right, okay, let's start out, actually. I want to say at the outset of this show, even though it should go without saying on any of my talk shows, if anyone's ever seen them, I don't really like the approach where either you have to all agree about something on a topic or the angle of, like, you have to battle to the ends of the earth over it. To me, it's like... You have to consider the entertainment value. Like, sometimes it's fun to battle over stuff if people are heated and they have great sides to it, you know. But my point basically is, if people are never going to come to a conclusion, it's better to kind of like battle but make your points in doing so, and then we move on and we don't all have to agree. Meanwhile, similarly, if someone says something you don't like, you definitely don't have to agree with it or play into that. So now that I've said all that, veteran, if any of them agree with anything you said right there, you're golden, mate. See, they can't say it was just niceness at this point in time. See what I did there? Not bad. Not bad. Exactly.
True.
Right. So, because obviously there are a lot of topics, including about G2, that are a little bit contentious we can talk about. So, Grabbz, should we just get out of the way immediately? Should we talk about why you've decided to just play God with the fucking last playoff spots and start just deciding from your fucking God Emperor throne? Like, come before me, Rogue and Origen. I will decide who makes the playoffs. You have done well, Vitality. I will troll pick into you. Rogue, fuck you. Like, what? Everyone thinks that, Grabbz, because unfortunately the circumstances, for people who don't know, I'll very quickly run through. So in the game you had against Vitality, you did the Garen top pick, And contextually, part of the problem was it came from someone who had a sign, so it seems like it wasn't part of the plan for the draft. Obviously, you can tell us if it is. And then the other part is because Wonder himself in the pro view was looking at the abilities and afterwards basically implied, like, yeah, don't play the champion. The problem is, in a normal circumstance, whatever, you've locked in your seed, you're probably going to be the top ranked team. To you guys, maybe it doesn't matter. But the problem is, this is always my issue that I'm always wary about with round robin, is that you can have games that don't matter to the person at the bottom of the league and don't matter to the person at the top of the league, but really do matter to the person who, as I alluded to, is trying to battle for the playoff spot. Because to them, not only are they battling for every game, but when they look at the schedule even, they're thinking like, right, well, hopefully G2 beats Vitality and then, maybe we can beat this other team. And so if you kind of do your part and you beat the other team and then out of nowhere, not only does G2 lose, but it looks like partly in some sense due to a troll pick, people are going to get upset. And I personally speculate, like I wondered, were any of the teams upset? Like, what do you have to say about this whole situation, Grabbz?
Do you want the long-winded version or the short one?
Just start going and we'll see where you go with it.
Okay, first of all, to make sure, we did not randomly see a sign of pick Garen in the studio and then decide to pick it, because there was the whole meme with Papa's Mithy before already. Like 3 weeks ago, he's like, you can't be the best team in the world if you don't know Garen. Right. So he was casting, so we already knew beforehand there might be a situation where we pick Garen. So we started draft normally, and we make a draft where Garen could fit in a sense that the other 4 can carry even if Garen is dog shit, which he won a game with Fnatic, right? So he might not be as dog shit. So in our head,
Fnatic has a system, mate. You're just picking champions.
So in our head, we have...
keep going.
I mean, to agree, right? I'm not saying it's not, but
sure.
We had double hard engage of Rakan and Graggos with hyper carry and Azir. We're supposed to have bot pressure of Lucian and Rakan, but they had Hylissang, which we didn't play against for a long time. We fuck up the dive and then the snowball, right? But in theory, this draft could have been playable. It doesn't matter that Garen is getting pushed in top because, Karma got 1 plate, I think, only. Like, he could hold the wave there. And then we would have scaled with Azir, and then the team fighting gets really easy. Also, we had the idea that since Vitality, they might pick Echo into Azir, and then we could put Garen into Echo. So there was some thought into it.
You're going to roll lane swap, right, okay.
Bullshit pick, right, exactly. So, of course, it looks bad. So, coming back to the competitive integrity, which it's annoying for me, it's because I've been there with Rocket. And we had this Merkel run after going 0-7, I believe. We played the worst game ever in history in Europe between Origen and Rocket, the 70-minute slugfest where both teams are just complete dog shit. And both should have been relegated at that moment. And then we won 6 best of 3s in a row. We even beat Youngbuck's G2, which was undefeated, 2-1.
Okay.
And the next day, Fnatic had to play Misfits. Misfits already qualified. Fnatic had to fight and win, or else we go playoffs. What happens is Misfits wins the first game, and the next 2 ones, they give them the only champs they could play were Shen, Lee Sin, and Kennen. In the first game, they banned them. 2 and 3, they leave them open, because afterwards, Moose said they wanted to practice for playoffs. So, of course, in that moment, I also got mad, right? It's the last day. We were backstage already with makeup on. I think Betson needed makeup on, because Riot wanted to interview them about the Mercury run. And then Misfits was like, guess what? He ain't qualifying. In the end, though, especially with 18 games, I think if you deserve to be on playoffs, and there's one big thing I hate about the system is 6 out of 10 teams go to playoffs, which kind of devalues the whole point. Because I think if more of the half of the league goes there, then if you deserve to be there, you really should be getting there in 18 games. And I can say that from the standpoint, I've been there, right? I'm not saying this off the G2 throne of, my God, we're good, get good. I've been there, and I thought that way. Like, if we actually deserved it, we would have not lost 7 best of 3s in a row. And I think that's the way this team should go, especially if picks which are in the game, which, Riot put a champ out to play, right? So you play this. Is this worse than, let's say, playing 3 academy players and then losing the game? Because
that's a fair point.
An angle, right? Like Fnatic put in MikyX for 1 game and then put Nemesis Spot. Is that winning competitive integrity? All I can say is we played to win. We tried.
Sure.
Of course, it kind of looked bad because we got snowballed on, and then naturally, if it's such a pick, there's a different mindset, especially at best of 1 as well. So yeah, in the end, I think if you're a team looking at that game and say, we didn't get to playoffs because G2 trolled, then you probably didn't deserve to go playoffs anyways. That's my honest,
What's your take on this Youngbuck? Because as he actually said there, quite clever approach, by the way, is the way he was very reasonable. He explained himself, and then at the end, he just sort of deflected. Like in Fnatic, they're sort of doing the same shit. So why is that okay? It's like, get that fucking Youngbuck guy. He's doing it as well. So what do you guys think of this? Because obviously he's got a point there, actually.
I mean, they lost of him, right?
If the logic is that putting in a suboptimal team in any context, now in this scenario, supposedly, I'm guessing it was something, I don't know, behavioural or some sort of issue within the team that week. So maybe it was extracurricular. Like, that presumably wasn't the best possible lineup Fnatic could field, right?
That is correct, yeah. But
so what do you think on the general topic then?
Yeah, to pivot away from this and pivot back onto G2.
Yeah, of course.
It makes sense that if you have 18 games, then you should be easily able to make playoffs if you're worthy of it. I think the nonsense part is going into the draft saying, yeah, we can win 4 versus 5 if the draft is okay. Having said that, as a player as well, having been a player, I'd rather finish 7th than 6th because you're going to get 3-0'd and not even have a chance of making Worlds anyway.
Especially with our format, like it's going to be very hard to get a hard finish with the little double Olympic that comes in later.
Yeah, so imagine Rogue makes 6th in playoffs and then maybe they get the 6th spot in Gauntlet. Let's be real, they're not getting a 3rd spot. Might as well go home and celebrate.
I like the way that what I love Veteran is they both made such reasonable points, but at the end they all ended on basically actually the equivalent of like, just get good, just listen, motherfucker, if you couldn't win the other games, it's not my problem. Which, by the way, it isn't. Like, that's one thing I will say about it. It's like, and when I've criticised this, the first thing I criticise is the format, because the format allows it and the game allows it. Like, that's the weird thing about League of Legends. You absolutely can pick any champions you want. Like, if you want to do a complete troll comp, who can say you can't do it? Like, because for a start off, what if you won with it? What does that game not count now? When you won with it, like, I mean, G2's done plenty of those drafts themselves and won with them, so it's not like those are considered trolls, are they? So, Veteran, obviously you gave your thoughts on it on the Cabashard episode, who, for obvious reasons, went out of his way to stress that the Garen pick didn't affect Vitality beating Glorious G2. Weird how people's... No, of course not, of course not.
Really bad at them.
Okay, what do you think in terms of what they've said, though, Veteran?
God, I mean, I don't think it's like clear cut either way, to be honest, in terms of like responsibility. Like, are you responsible if Rogue doesn't go to playoffs? Well, obviously not. But like at the same time, like I guess my argument would be that if the playoffs are already kind of out of your hands, then if it's already like up to the fucking fates and it's up to other teams to decide if you go playoffs or not, then you probably don't deserve to go there. At that point, You're just lucky if you make it there. However,
there's actually a great line, by the way, that Youngbuck will know, which comes from MMA, which just says, "Don't leave it to the judges." Like, if you're in a title fight and you win by a slight margin in most people's eyes, but then the judges all give the other guy the win, what you don't complain about the judges, because the judges are doing what he does his job in theory. What they tell the fighter is, don't leave it in his hands, knock the guy out, choke him out, just win outright where you don't have this problem. I think it's a fair point.
The mentality of like, well, we didn't deserve to make it if we didn't make it is obviously the mentality that any of the teams that somehow don't make it in should take, rather than just venting all their anger at Grabbz and at G2 as a whole, or maybe even Fnatic. I don't know what Fnatic are going to decide to do in the last week. I don't even know if you guys can decide someone else's playoffs one. But I don't think it's quite clear cut either way, because you can make the counter argument that your playoffs are technically always in other people's hands unless you go like flawless, like technically speaking.
Sure.
Unless you hit like a really monster pivot point, it's very difficult for other teams' matches not to actually influence your match. And maybe other teams, like, say that you guys practice something in scrims. I know this has happened to both of you. Say you guys practice something in scrims and then, I don't know, like Vitality fucking nick your level 1 or some shit and do it like way worse. Like, if that kind of shit happens, then like, is that on them now that everyone can prep for your level 1? Did they just ruin your game? Was that up to them to like honorably not do it? Like, and that can like cascade, that can end up really influencing a playoffs run.
Sure.
So the responsibility angle, I mean, I don't really think it's worth the argument. And I think Rogue could have made way better decisions in terms of setup. There were some games as well where they seem to like try to experiment when they're really not in a position where they can try to experiment. Like when they switched to Sona, Tom Kench early blinds, when they'd spent all of their time on blue side last picking bot lanes. Like I'd more look at that as a reason why you're not making playoffs, rather than because G2 decided to flex really hard and pick Garen and not quite do so well with it. ultimately, I'm way more interested in if any of the teams formally complained, because the franchise angle of this is that if these teams are pissed that they're not going to get the exposure that playoffs brings and the ads will be able to sell as a result of being in playoffs and the amount of extended time that the sponsors can have on stage on their fucking shirts and all this shit, I'd be wondering if any of the organizations complained because maybe you just denied Rogue that spot and their investors probably aren't thinking in terms of a competitive mindset of like, well, we didn't deserve to make it anyway. They just see the fucking money. And I wonder if enough people complain, if that would actually strong on Riot to do anything. Like, did you get any formal complaints?
We haven't received anything formal nor unofficial. Like, no coach went to me and said, okay, this is bullshit.
Okay.
That's also why I took the stance, especially because the competitors should know, right?
Sure.
In that moment, maybe you feel angry, but let's say a team like Axel, which now looks better, they had 5-6 games, they had a huge advantage and lost and drew.
Mm-hmm.
So they just know, like, okay, we weren't good enough,
You could also make a strong case, again, tying into their own responsibility. Like, well, you guys didn't have to play that fucking other bot lane to start out, did you? Why are you giving people free games?
Yeah, I mean, in the end, as I said, for example, if this would be Worlds, single round robin, only double round
only
robin,
a small amount of games,
6 games, then it will be different because then this one game has a bigger impact, right?
Yes.
Percentage-wise, but 18 games, I think, and again, 6 teams got through. That means you don't even need 50% win rate. You can have less and you still go through. Don't manage that and then still look at another team and say, but they trolled, then I'm sorry, to a certain degree, you should look at your own team first.
Okay. What about this then? To pivot away, Youngbuck, how does one use Garen and win a game in LEC?
Well, not putting a top line into Karma for starters, and maybe abusing Yuumi really hard. Like, this champion is too broken, so anything you pair with it is probably way too strong. So that's the only way.
You guys literally used a boosting strategy against Vitality. Is that not like the hardest flex possible to say that we'll literally boost our way through this elo bracket to get to fucking second place? Like,
in a way, I mean, we thought it was the best strategy, right? And it was actually like the comp that they picked into having this like Garen Yuumi Vessel seemed to really counter that team comp. I don't know if you watched the game after 15 minutes, but they kept trying to run at us and hilariously failing. Yeah. So it made a lot of sense. We were on stage not very sure, but then I was like, okay, let's do it, because there was a lot of uncertainty on whether we actually want to pull it off on stage and actually play Garen. Because if we lose, we're gonna get the same shitstorm that G2 just got.
Especially when Vitality gets 2 wins against Garen.
Yes.
No, that was the best part. Because
check the bank accounts or something.
Yeah, obviously at that point in time, Fnatic's like fucking baying out. They're like, "Oh, you think Garen is your ally?" Like, no, it isn't. We know we can actually play around it. Believe it or not.
I mean,
is it? By the way, since you said Veteran, it's a boosting strat. Is it actually viable for more than just a surprise game?
I mean, it's a boosting strat that people are currently using to rank accounts to master really fast and sell them in Europe, and they've been doing that for like a month right now, and it's very easy and it's very lucrative. And the issue
is the logic that you don't know what you're doing when you play against it.
It's not necessarily that. It's just that once you hit mid game and you have any sort of itemization on them, so long as you just barely survive the poke, and even as you just saw then, like, you can get pretty far behind. Like, it's really difficult if you're not playing like a proper macro game setup. And Vitality do just love to fight, and anyone in solo queue, I mean, there's going to be so many abusable windows that you have with Yuumi Garen running around. Like, Yuumi Pyke is another version that can do it, which Grabbz has obviously done. But the problem with Garen is Garen becomes completely invincible at point. Is just running at your face and you're just fucking terrified. Whereas Pyke is less so invincible, but he is kind of invisible. And Vitality fell victim to a Yuumi combo with a melee twice now to do different teams, both of which are here. And the issue is that these guys do not say no on collapsing to a skirmish, and both these compositions really abuse a team like that is essentially, well, brainless, even though they're not really here to defend themselves. And it's just really good in those situations, which is any solo queue situation for anyone who wants to try running this shit. So,
what do you guys think then about Vitality then? So obviously, since you both played them recently, it's a decent team to ask about. What about this team? Because obviously, the interesting thing for me with their team is when they started off so poorly in the summer, everyone just decided they're obviously done. Like, they're never going to win any games. They're going to be shit. They're going to be the worst team, obviously. Haha, we all said so for years. But they've actually had a pretty respectable climb back, and obviously now in decent position. So what do you think of them, Youngbuck? Doesn't seem like your philosophy of playing the game, really.
Actually, I think that recently they started to focus way more on the bot side of the map, and that's when they actually started winning, because playing for top is just not very optimal. It will probably never work in a best of 5 against any good team. So seeing them play around bot side is the way to go. Also, probably the reason why Origen is losing a lot is playing Tahm Kench and Ezreal sitting on the tower, just throwing that out there.
All right, I'll put a note on that one. Right, yeah, keep going.
We also during scouting, I noticed that Mowgli is actually incredibly intelligent. He's probably one of the better junglers, and is really under the radar in the way he plays for camps and uses his teammates around him to just take the enemy jungler out of the game. So I have a lot of respect for Mowgli, and I think just the way he plays recently, how they play as a team, and maybe draft a little bit better on bot lane and actually contest the bot side of the map, is the reason why they're winning.
Okay. What do you think?
I'm really interested in what you just said there, actually, because you just said that. Do you mean Vitality specifically can't play around topside and that would get beats in playoffs, or that in general playing around topside is not optimal?
Well, they got away with it for a year and a half. They made it to Worlds playing that playstyle.
Oh, yeah.
It's also, Cabochard was their best player, or maybe is their best player.
I agree about that in terms of Vitality. It's just that your team also, like the biggest change between Spring and Summer is that you guys now have a much higher priority on Bwipo than you ever did before, specifically on the top side of the map than you ever did before. You even have Hylissang making significant amount of plays from mid to top whenever you can. So you want to like elaborate a bit more on if you mean this like generally or just to Vitality?
I think the difference between us compared from Spring to Summer is that Bwipo has been putting a lot more hours into the game and has really stepped it up. So he's a lot more confident in transferring his leads to the other side of the map, and the team has also gained more confidence in him being able to do so. So when we're in-game and we communicate opportunities in the top side of the map, it's very easy to just accept it because we know the execution will be there and he will transfer the leads. It's not necessarily that before the games we're like, okay, we're going to play for top this game. That's not really the Fnatic style.
So it's like an incidental thing that you guys are playing more around top side rather than like a structured thing.
Yeah, I would say so.
The fucking mind games are strong with Youngbuck. He's like, listen, to other teams who have their best players the top laner, don't play through top. You'll never win a best of 5. I'm going to do it whenever I want, though. But that's because I'm different. I'm sort of better than you guys, and you can't do what I do. So you guys just stay away from that. It's never going to work for you. Play through Attila if possible at all times, especially against Rekkles and against Rekkles. I'll be doing whatever I want in Whipple, though. Like, but that's... It's kind of complicated, guys. I could write it all out on a big chalkboard, be like one of those Einstein equations, or you wouldn't understand it. So just listen to what I'm saying. Play away from Cabochard. Thank you. Right.
Yeah.
I like it. Gamesmanship. Right, come on, Grabbz. What do you think of Vitality?
I think the same thing as for the last 2 years. Very feast or famine. Even in the game they won against us, there was like a huge stretch post 20 minutes where they didn't do anything really to save the game. And my players just think okay, they should be doing something now. They're not really. So they actually give us a chance to come back. So they still have huge issues with how they want to set up around Nash, which is like a thing for 2 years now, since Gios, Kikis, Mowgli.
Sure.
So it's still kind of gated by how strong they get into early game, right? And I think it's also too late in the season to fix it. So even if they get to playoffs, they will not beat us, Fnatic, or Splyce, for sure. Schalke depends on the early game. But yeah,
fair enough.
Don't think they changed much in the approach. Even though we can say they recently stepped up, but then again, last week they went 0-2, I believe, with the same issues they had before.
Okay.
Right. So it's not only Vitality. I think in the best of 1 setting, it's really hard to make judgments on teams because I think this season alone, with 5 different teams who suddenly are really good, they won 2 games in a row and they lost the 4 next ones. So yeah, I don't think there were huge strides there. But as Youngbuck said, they made a change in approach towards both sides. Just because right now, as you said, there's more power there in the current meta, so they acknowledge that one. I just think it's really hard for them to improve their mid-late game in those last 2 weeks they have, basically.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of best of ones that, it's hard to know how to put too much stock into. A few weeks ago, there was this game between G2 and Fnatic, the G2 one. So I want to ask about that, actually. What did you think of this game, Grabbz? Obviously a big game to play.
I don't know. Like, of course, it's a huge matchup in Europe. Honestly, I would have to make a bigger angle because when we came back from Rift Rivals, we were sure we're going to lose like 3 games. Like, we were thinking, okay, how do we actually make sure we get top 2? This was our goal. Because as you could see, every other team that went MSI struggled for a long time after coming back. Chi is still struggling. SKT with 1-5. Flash also not even in playoffs right now. Liquid lost, I think, 2 games as well, and we had the same expectation. So basically, our early season went far better than expected. then of course Fnatic comes. I think we didn't target Hylissang as we should have. That game he got Pike, and then of course our lane swap, like role swap between Wonder and Caps didn't work out really. Had a happy game. Broxah got so many ganks off, even though we knew where he was. So afterwards, we didn't give too much thought about the game, which was like a typical G2 game where we like run it down together. So yeah, in the same way, Youngbuck will say that this game we just played is the same, that they died when they shouldn't have died. So it's not conclusive at all. And we have to wait for the best of 5 to see who's actually better. Whoever gets Pike wins, I guess.
I was going to say that actually, because in the game against you guys, we should have prioritized Pike over the Karma in that specific draft. But yeah, you guys got to Pike that game, and then it snowballed from there.
I mean, we thought about what's going to happen if you do, but we know you're not going to do it. So you're not really the ones to change up drafts from one day to another. So
okay, on your side, Youngbuck, like obviously this is like kind of a tired angle. I'm not a huge fan of it generally, but sometimes it is the case. Was it a big deal to try and beat G2? Like I know they try to always call it like statement game, you know, because the logic is if you're going into playoffs and you can say I beat them twice, that does do something. You know, there's a psychological element to that. So was that significant, do you think, for this match?
Yeah, I think so. Also, there are other circumstances around where if we beat them, we would be tied in score with the head-to-head win. So that was a really big deal for us because I think finishing first in regular split should guarantee you going to Athens and even to some degree having a really big advantage in the finals. It also meant that we broke away from Splyce again. So, and of course, it is G2. It is kind of our rivals. It is Caps. We want to beat him. MSI champions, we wanted to show them, you know, it wasn't just a fluke the one time where we hit the Nexus, like backdoor them, and then the other time we just sure. We just wanted to show it's not a fluke, and well, they actually put us in the ground the last time around, so we'll have to see in Athens how that goes.
Even though they've done the polite thing and said it wasn't that decisive, you know, there was different factors. Veteran, did you find this game decisive?
I found this game really interesting because both G2 and Fnatic, the way that their teams end up using midsection, which is apparently incidental according to Youngbuck, is kind of different. Where it's like a starting point for Fnatic, whereas for G2 will often open their support jungle in River without going for a grouping in mid first. But Fnatic will always go for like the grouping first and then go from that towards side lanes. But because G2 were ahead on the play, G2 would essentially meet Fnatic when Fnatic were like starting their play in midsection or transferring their power in midsection before contesting River Vision. So you had like a lot of skirmishes around mid, which made for like one of the most entertaining games. And in most of those circumstances, though, G2 were just like ahead on the play, though, is the thing. And even in the circumstances where Fnatic were winning skirmishes, they would very often just give up tempo because G2 understood when to reset properly. And that ended up being like the defining feature of the game. And so from my perspective, I never really felt like even when G2 were like 1.5k gold behind, they were ever actually behind on the map. And some of those skirmishes were even won due to small things like that minion that MikyX hooked, which was a bit random. So I wouldn't really say it was like that close, but also the first game that Fnatic played against G2 wasn't necessarily that close either. They've kind of like both stomped each other at this point. And they've both somewhat exposed each other's flaws. Like, I mean, this isn't necessarily a flaw, but when G2 are behind, at least this split, they look like any other team. And Fnatic had a really good composition to set them behind on tempo. And the only 2 games that you guys have lost, you didn't really have any sort of like insane strategy like you had against Origen in the first game of the last playoff series, where you guys did a really good 1-1-3, or a 3-1-1. That was really good. Every time Origen went for a fucking Cloud Drake, you were taking stuff with it, even though you should have been outscaled like ages ago. But this split, there hasn't been anything like that when you guys have been behind. So maybe just getting a tempo advantage over G2 and understanding tempo is enough to beat them. There's anything crazy coming out of them there. So it's 1-1 right now. Last game, I think G2 were just like always ahead. And I would have to put my money, sorry, Youngbuck, on G2 in a best of 5 in playoffs, but maybe in like the next weekend and by that point, like I won't be doing that, but you didn't seem that close last time. Is what I'm gonna say. So
Why is Veteran unusually polite this episode? What the fuck's that? Normally, normally I have to set up the question to counteract the fact that you're about to just flame the guy to his face.
Well, the problem is we just took two of the top two teams here.
True.
And Youngbuck probably, Youngbuck literally just said that, like, yeah, like they pounded us to the ground last time. So I can just say, yeah, it didn't look close last time. So, like, there's no real way to be rude here because.
Let's see if you can manage. Yeah, keep thinking. Right, what about this then? Let's move to the awkward section of the show where we talk about each of your teams, and therefore every single time people have the option to actually say what they think or say what would be polite and expedient. So every time you got that choice, boys, the two options, you can go between them. I personally just tend to go with the one where you're kind of rude all the time. But like I said, every now and then, like on this show, I have to be the good guy. Believe it or not, I'm the fucking good cop in this scenario. So I think I understand why this show has 10k viewers now, right? Okay. So it is in a mad way, Veteran. Like what's mad is I'm actually coming off good on this show because everyone just says you're the arsehole. So it's like brilliant. That's also why I work with Loco. I enjoy actually being the good guy for once. So Youngbuck.
No, wait, what? Wait, no, on the
so?
They all say you're the arsehole, so you mean you...
Nah, that was just the one episode I went mental because he was tilting me. Normally, they just flame the fuck out of me. Like, people actually love when I flame him for some reason. It's kind of unfair, actually, because if you flame anyone else, they get mad, don't they? So
I mean, people love you being the bad guy, so this show has done really well for my branding because it's like being the bad guy like seems to be a good way to fucking do branding. And
in a way. Yeah. In a way. Right, so Youngbuck, there's obviously a lot of discussion about Fnatic at all times, and I would just say it like this. I think the most reasonable way to say it is, the reason I often contrast Fnatic with TSM is because you can't have a normal discussion about anything with TSM because it's always like there's such an extreme set of people who universally love everything about TSM and almost are on like a religious level. And then the problem is, I don't know if it's because of them or there'd always be these people, but then there's another group that just basically hate everything about TSM. And so it's trying to, half the time you can't even read people's comments. You have to try and figure out where they stand first to see if they're being biased, right? And then in the middle, there's just all the helpless casualties who dare to think they can give an opinion either way without being an ultra, basically. So Fnatic definitely has some fans that are like that, but also definitely has some haters, some on this show maybe. And so we want to give you a chance, right, to give your take on some of these things. And we'll see if there's any pushback. We'll see what you think. So I actually did appreciate, by the way, and I will say this is one thing that's gone lost, Youngbuck, in a lot of our criticisms of Fnatic, is, to be fair, a lot of the information actually came from when you came on this show and gave us some insight into the system and the communication aspects and how you changed some of the roles of the players. So it actually wasn't just entirely constructed as like, what's the most genius way we could reverse engineer a way to hate on Fnatic even though they're actually winning these games, Veteran? How could we do that? Like, the problem is, Broxah's winning all these games, so how do we say that he's not just the MVP? He's not even as good as Cadril. Like, that's the problem. It's like, it sounds like we did sit around and just spitball ideas, but we didn't. It was genuine, right?
I can come in here, actually. I can come in here because I don't see it. Like, everyone sees it, but I don't see a disconnect between a team that is reliant on a system and, like, a team that is top 2, top 3. Like, Rox Tigers had a system that worked so well for them that they were contesting for Worlds, you know? Like, it's not out of the fucking blue that a team with an identifiable system does really fucking well. I don't understand the disconnect that so many random fans seem to have here, where they seem to interpret it as, like, flame, or they have this idea that, like, you're saying essentially that players must be getting lucky if they're not all like top 2, top 3, but they're on a top 2, top 3 team. Like, I don't see the disconnect there, but that's like a weird fan thing to see that disconnect, and it blows my mind every time I see it.
I think classic SK Telecom, another good example. People were absolutely fine faming Bengi while he won all the fucking world championships and LCKs. Like, they didn't have any problem saying he wasn't the best.
And then people like end up reverse engineering it. Like after these guys, like, all of SKT barring Faker ended up joining like the same Chinese team at different points, and I think it was like Vici Gaming, and that team was like always like dog shit, right? No matter which ex-SKT players that they took, and then they would all reverse engineer. Oh, I guess Faker's carrying them all along. But so you guys must be surprised so often to like if you model teams where it's like they're all top 2, top 3 because they're on the top 2, top 3 team. You guys must be surprised every fucking day.
A lot of these fans, I feel like, Veteran, it's like someone living in London and then going like, what's the weather like? Oh, it's raining today. Always rains in London. Only ever rains, never sunshine. And then the day it comes out, sunshine. Well, it's fucking always been sunny. What are you talking about? Well, it never rained? Well, that was just an occasional thing. It's like, come on, man. We can just take the average, surely. We can talk about the principles.
Especially if I'm definitely the bad guy in the show. Like, I seriously, like, it blows my mind every time I read those comments. They're so retarded, and you guys must be surprised so fucking often. It's unreal. Anyway, go on with whatever you're going to say.
What about if we start with the abstract then, Youngbuck, which is when people talk about Broxah in this context, before we get into the specifics of it, what's your take as someone on the inside? Like, is it significant to you if he's considered the best jungler? I mean, some people have said he's the MVP of the split. Obviously, there's this other side where some people think, I mean, to be fair, they never say he's bad. They just say they think other people could be better, or that the system kind of props him up. So what's your take as someone on the inside?
Well, I would actually prefer starting off with the question on what kind of system do you think we have? Because I don't really feel like we have a system necessarily. I mean, we have a way of, this is how we get bot tier 1, this is how we get Drakes, this is how we get Rit Herald.
Right.
But is it more like how we draft or how we communicate?
Not really draft, although draft like kind of ties into it. Like, essentially, both splits, you guys dead man like an entire side of the map at almost every stage of the game. And this includes like mid to late game. Your comeback is always the 0-3-2, and it's probably one of the best executed 0-3-2s in the league, by the way. I've brought it up like a lot, but it is still a comeback mechanic. In the early game though, in summer, you guys basically abandoned top. And then you went very hard for bot to the point where Bipper was sacrificing 30 CS, 40 CS, 50 CS a game, just so that you guys would collapse bot side on every possible opportunity. Because this meant that Whippo would be on bad waves a lot because he was just fucking abandoned. He got a very bad rep from last split, and I ended up having to defend him a lot because there's literally impossible situations that will occur in multiple one-on-one top matchups. As you well know, Youngbuck, if your jungler isn't there at proper moments, these are unavoidable in pro play. And Whippo didn't receive any of those kinds of help. This split, though, you are doing this strategy in reverse, and it's much better because you're willing to sacrifice HP or even tend towards picks like Karma that are very good at manipulating the bot wave state before you then send Hylissang off to roam. So you're still able to play 3 lanes, and Rekkles doesn't necessarily end up in a situation where the wave is perma bouncing from him because you're willing to just trade HP bot side for a good wave state before you then send Hylissang to mid with Broxah and then lean towards top side to Whippo. So you don't end up having to fix bot lane, though in the second half of this split, Broxah has sometimes like paused his first clear around bot side and then moved towards top side, but that will basically be it. Like, he'll pay lip service to bot side early, and then that will basically be it. Otherwise, Hylissang is free to go to mid and then go to top, and then that's how you guys end up playing the map. And sometimes you'll end up dragging Whippo towards the mid section if you guys are well behind in the early game, like you ended up doing versus G2. But that is actually quite few and far between, because this system of groupings that you guys do is actually beyond what a lot of other teams and within their systems are actually capable of responding to. However, there are 2 exceptions. Rogue responded to it very, very well with their bot side picks and with the way that they played the map. And Splyce just intentionally matched you at every single step of this outside of the initial Hylissang roam. Outside of that, they just tried to match you at every stage of this, and in both of those games, you guys were struggling. Because you didn't get the roams towards mid-off and then didn't transfer all that priority towards top side, then, yeah, I mean, you guys didn't really have a plan B there. You guys, like, once the system is broken, I mean, Inspired just suddenly looked like a really, really good jungler, and everyone was like talking about him, you know? I do think Inspired is an intuitively good jungler. I just don't think his early game plans are necessarily good. So that's what I think of your system. Some of your picks have ended up evolving around that. Thank God you guys are prioritizing Aatrox, because that thing is an absolute fucking tank, and I have no idea why other teams don't prioritize it as well as you guys do. It is blind pickable, and you should prioritize it even harder, but you guys need stuff like the Karma to fix the bot lane state before you can do all of this stuff you do. And that's why I think targeting support pool is so good against you guys, because that's where the mid priority power comes from, and that's where all the plays to top lane end up being able to come from. Like, against G2, Hylissang literally just ended up TPing top side just to enable that lane and then roam with him towards the midsection. You know, Hylissang does so much for you guys. If it wasn't for the fact that he is in a league with a guy who I genuinely believe is a contender for the best player in the world, then I would...
You mean it's MikyX there?
Yeah, I mean MikyX there. Then I would say that he's like one of the best supports Europe has ever had. And he is still one of the best supports Europe has ever had based on the play that he's done this split. So, there you go.
That was extensive. Have fun, everybody.
Yeah, so what was the question exactly? How Broxah fits into it?
You asked me.
No. I mean, I asked you
Okay.
a question, but Thorin
Yeah,
asked
sure.
one before that, right?
Sure. Well, if you want, we can go back to that question. Do you have any thoughts on that aspect? Like obviously, one of the issues here is Veteran's having to speculate on some of this based on things he's observing. So maybe, like in the other scenario, maybe you're doing something that was just a response to something particular, not as planned out. So what would you say to that? How do you see the system? Or lack of thereof?
So I think in spring it was quite planned out that we were going to play very heavily towards bot or from mid to bot with champions like Lissandra, just abusing them and ending the game in the first 15 minutes and getting big leads. I think now the meta is... So if we get Yuumi, we're not going to roam towards mid and try to enable him and make any plays there, right? But we will first pick the champion if we get it. After that, though, usually our priorities are something like Rakan, and then, well, against G2 it would be Pyke. And those champions are naturally really good at roaming around the map and playmaking. So it's not necessarily we go into the game or before a game in a draft meeting and say, okay, we need to have a champion on support that can enable our mid laner. It's more like, okay, we are going to get one of these champions and then we're going to build the rest of our comp around it. And currently in this meta, it just happens to be that most of the supports, well, 2 out of 3 out of 4 best supports currently just move around the map very freely and make a lot of plays. So I would say I would attribute it more to that. And then, yeah, we do try to fill in with the AD carry spot with champions that don't get abused at hard. So Ezreal, Karma, other good way for champions could be...
Makes logical sense.
I agree with you that the meta is this way right now, and I think it really favors you guys that it is this way, because again, I think your system for playing mid to top is better than your system playing top to bot. But like, I'm hoping that if the meta switches back, then that will then you will have like something new for us in that regard. That isn't going to just turn Whipper into the most hated person by Fnatic's fan base again, because that was very, very, very odd time. But that made comments like what you just said about you think that it's you should play around bot side relative to Vitality. That made that so interesting. That's why I really wanted to know if you think that that's just a Vitality thing, or if you think that that's like a broad-based meta thing, because you guys aren't actually doing that like at all.
Okay, so I think the first clear is just based on the matchup where you have priority and where you don't have priority, so where you have to play towards. If there's a possibility to dive someone or you have to defend for a dive. And I think after that, I think before 6-7 minutes, I think you can still make plays on top side of the map. And after that, I think the best way to play League of Legends, basically from level 6 onwards, from the solo lanes, playing mid to bot or playing bot to mid and controlling the bot river is just the most optimal way to play League of Legends. Secure Drake, and then after 10 minutes, you can start playing for Herald, which means you start including your solo lanes into the game, or especially your top lane.
Okay. Drake dependent, I'm assuming. Like,
what do you guys think
Drake,
about?
it's a little bit different than if it's an ocean.
This is something that I want to just quickly add to the Vitality discussions, that I also think they got very lucky with the Drake RNG when they started deciding to play hard for bot side, because they actually got Infernals in those games. So yeah, anyway.
What do the other two of you think then about the more general principle? He said that that's the way he thinks at the moment you should play League, basically mid to bot or bot to mid, and then after that you can go top winner, you can get the Herald. So what do you think, Grabbz?
I started with Youngbuck there that it's not an inherent system. It's, you see how the draft played out. You see making the pressure, and that's how you play the game. I think it's unfair to say that Fnatic plays only one system at all. Sure, it looks like they want to enable Hylissang, but for example, it doesn't matter if Rekkles plays Karma, Ezreal, Zaya, whatever. They look at, okay, the wave is bouncing, can I get Dofia? No, I can catch alone, Hylissang can move. And that's how every good team should play. I don't think that's Fnatic sitting down 3 hours before, or we need those 2 picks or else it doesn't work. So I think...
Is that G2 players?
Basically, I mean, again, like, I'm blessed, right? I have 5 really fucking good players. So we never have the drafting before, oh, this game we want to play Youngbuck to the top side or bot side or from mid. It's okay, what do you think, which picks are strong, and those picks decide how we play the game. So it's never player based, it's okay, what picks can we get? If we get those 2 picks, it makes sense. We have strong to mid side, we play towards that. If we get those 2 picks, we play differently. That, of course, does not work for every team. And that's where systems come in. Systems are there to cover something like a weakness, right?
Yeah.
That's where the system is there. Like, if you don't have systems, it just means either you're dog shit or you're really good. And we don't like systems. So it's basically, I think, I watched Veteran's VOD review of our game against Fnatic. And we had like a long, wide explanation about Miky moving mid as level 5 as Pyke. Like I said, like level 3, and you're like expanding everything, and I just looked at no, it's just a bouncing wave, Perkz can catch alone, and then he moves.
Yeah, but most people don't understand what that means, or why it was significant that he was able to move mid first, or what that actually meant, which is all the stuff that I was explaining.
Yeah, it's just that you can play through top, but just way easier to play through bot because you open up another player, which you can't on top, right? He still has to catch waves. So is it a meta-given thing? No, it's just a numbers-based thing, right? If you can free up a player, that means you get complete bot side control. That means mid laner cannot play aggressive, and then you can choose does the mid go mid, bot or goes to top. So
I agree with you saying that because your team reacts to waves really, really well in all situations like that. But Youngbuck's team actually doesn't react that way to waves when their system ends up getting, or their optimal way of playing, and they draft a very particular way that everyone is now targeting, including you guys, actually gets interrupted. There are multiple scenarios where they aren't reacting to bouncing waves like they should be reacting to bouncing waves. They do just start looking uncomfortable. And the other big thing is that, they don't seem to have as good of a grasp on reset timers as your team would be. So this is the closest it's ever going to get to Flame. But I don't think it's any sort of surprise that I'm going to view Fnatic as a worse team than G2 right now. But very particularly, they don't seem to be thinking about the game as fluidly as G2 seems to be thinking about the game right now. And it's you can very much go and check how.
I want to jump in here because again it comes back to what Dan was said before. Fnatic does not force a system. It's just for example, against us, we knew from the day before they like Karma. With Karma, they want an AD carry pick in mid. That means if we ban Corki out, they're going to go for TF. We knew that. They don't have Aatrox. We knew that. So they have the same way of thinking that their picks dictate how they should play the game. That means Rekkles gets a pick, which can safely push out waves or catch a wave.
Okay.
Means the sun can move. So my point basically is just that they don't have a system which dictates how they draft, even though it looks something like that. But
right, well, 1 second, Grabbz. I might just be an idiot here. I'm obviously not. Obviously, this is one of my weaknesses is things like drafts and compositions. But the thing I don't understand is it sounds a bit like you're doing a Weldon Green here, where you just keep changing the terminology, and therefore when you change the meaning of the word, you're as far as I can tell, you're saying they don't have a system because what they do is just they always try to get certain picks, and then from those picks play from that. Isn't that a system? Change the word to plan if you want, mate. But it sounds like. Put it this way, I'll give you an analogy, right? When I was doing my revision for my exams at A-level, right? So when I was 18 years old, I never planned. I never had a whole system in place that I was going to not do the revision and play PlayStation. But the problem is, on the first week, Metal Gear Solid was out, and then I kept playing Metal Gear Solid and didn't do the revision. I actually wanted, on the next week, to, complete Metal Gear Solid. I wanted to then actually get some fucking revision on. Let's get some chemistry. Let's get some French in. We can do this. But then the problem is, then I had, Tomb Raider 3 or something. I was like, that is a fucking brilliant game as well, isn't it? So the problem is, because I kept picking these games, my system then was to not revise for my exams. Now, I never picked a textbook up, you'll notice there. If I'd ever done that differently, it'd make sense. So what's the difference here? What am I missing?
Maybe it's just easier if you're as a coach, but I think Youngbuck understands me, right? That they're not the difference is how you describe Fnatic is that they want to have this, and this, right? That's Fnatic. And that's their system. What I'm saying is that Fnatic itself doesn't have a system. In their meta, they believe what is strong, and therefore they play towards it. I think there's a big difference for me. If you think back to last E-Worlds, we had to play 1v1 kind of with our team. That's a system in my head. We need to have 1v1. If we don't get Punch on red side, it's going to be really hard. So... that's a system for me. But
as far as I can tell, I think I know what he means. Right, what he basically means, as far as I can tell, is if Rakan and Pyke and whatever the third one is don't exist in League of Legends, Fnatic wouldn't play this way. But the problem with that is, as far as I can tell, that's kind of what Veteran is saying. He's just using the word system.
Obviously, with the means at hand, Fnatic have an optimal way to play the game in their head, and this is the optimal way they think to play it, and they will always gravitate towards this if they can. The reason why I call it a system is because I think it masks some inherent weaknesses that Fnatic have relative to their jungle system. I don't actually think that their jungle system is capable of adaptation in a very strong way in the way that other teams are able to do so, which is why they seem to just ignore a certain side of the map when they play to them, whereas G2 are way more fluid about it. Origen are way more fluid about it. They're just wrong a lot now.
Right, I think I get the miscommunication. I think I've got it now. Actually, what Veteran just said there makes it more clear to me, because basically what he's saying is, right, in your case, Grabbz, you described a system as for example, if you have Yarn and Wadid bot lane, odds are you are not going to play through every lane and do whatever you want. You're going to have exactly the approach that you took because it's the most logical way to win. And you are literally going into every game kind of knowing that's how we want to play. And it's not necessarily just based on one pick, although in that particular case, the Tahm Kench was a pretty famous one, right? The difference is, I think I now know the difference between Veteran and Youngbuck. Youngbuck's basically saying, like, we haven't got into this topic yet. We haven't mentioned the word Broxah in the actual context yet. But basically, he's already preempted that because it's not about the fact that, like, Broxah's playing a certain way or Ripple's playing a certain way. It's that they think these support picks are super strong. And the logic, like he said, he actually thinks, remember, he didn't say just for Fnatic. He said for League of Legends, he thinks that's the best way to play at the moment. And so it's just essentially incidental. Like, if those champions didn't exist, they'd play differently. So I guess that's the part we should move to. Because now the real topic is, if they couldn't pick those, if those three champions didn't exist, Veteran, and they could in theory play through other lanes, would then this bring up the aspect of whether Brox is having issues or whether Nemesis is a player who needs the support? Would that then be an issue in that regard?
I mean, now that we have seen multiple games where these champions get removed from Hylissang, I think it's like really, really easy to answer that question, though. Like, yeah, they do just look like any other like mid-tier team at that point. They go from being a high-tier team when they play what they believe is optimal in the meta. They go from that to being a team that doesn't do any of the stuff that Grabbz says that these kinds of teams should be doing.
He's basically saying, Grabbz, that they, on some level, a better level, obviously, are doing what G2 did last year. He's kind of agreeing with you on that point, except you're making it a counterpoint. So,
but I would call that a system, which the terminology, I guess, is a bit weird. But for me, that is a system, and it is specifically to mask what I perceive to be. Which Youngbuck hasn't gotten a chance to like come back to yet. And
listen, he's smart, mate. He knows just sit out. It's like at school, you know, you keep your head down. He knows what he's doing.
Me and Grabbz argue about his team. He's like sitting out and chilling. Like, I do really want to get your take on that. So
he's doing some 8D chess. Come on.
Actually, I feel like we don't have any of those Tom Kench scenarios like around where we have to pick specific champions or play a specific way. In spring, looking back, we definitely had that. We knew we had to play one specific style. Like our mid lane had to have push on his own because we were not going to create it through any other means, whether that is jungle, top, support moving. So we needed to play champions like Lissandra or Syndra that would push in the wave on their own. And we knew we were better off playing scaling junglers. I think in the summer that has changed a lot, and I think that has a lot to do with Broxah's improvement. I think his play from summer to spring is like night and day, and I think he's way more aggressive and way more on the map and way more in the river and playing with the lanes. So right now we don't really have that problem with any kind of system. Like we can play multiple styles. I don't think we've been exposed yet, other than maybe a Tom Kench running in the river a few times and getting caught by a pike, but. I don't think Misfits or Rogue exposed us in any way. The Rogue game was more that we had a top side that was 0-4, I think 5 minutes in, and then we tried to fight against Olaf with Warrior and Chandler like 7 minutes after they already took the Drake. It was just the worst day we've had this entire year, I would say. Like it didn't make any sense. And then the Misfits game, what happened even? Okay, we had a really bad draft. I'll take some.
You had the Carver's Pike versus 1-3-1 setup instead of just going hard engage versus a 1-3-1. Some mid-global shit into it.
It was not a good draft. I'll take some responsibility there. I'm of the opinion that we should have won despite having a bad draft because we should be good enough to beat Misfits, even having like
it was the academy team.
Draft.
Yeah,
exactly. So even when we have like a 30-70 draft, we should be able to beat them. But we lost I think 2.5 lanes or 3 lanes, and then we also had a losing jungle matchup. So that sucked a bit. But to come back, I don't think we have a system. We don't have band-aids. We don't need Rakan or Pike or Yuumi. We can play without them. I think
ban them all. Famous last words there. Ban them all. Yeah, exactly. Just ban them all.
Well, Schalke tried. And
that's true.
I guess G2 got there, so we're 50-50. I imagine Splyce tries. We have to prepare for it every single week, right? Because, like we have maybe 3 or 4 champions in every role that we really like to play. So every week we have to prepare for what does happen if they ban Yuumi, Pike, Rakan? What does happen if they ban Aatrox, Karma? These kind of champions. Like we prepare for them, and then if teams want to give it to them, then we'll just show them why they should have banned it. That is our way of going about it. So I want to maybe make a line here with like the G2 draft because there was a lot of flame when we played against G2, and people were like, "Yeah, you're so predictable." And I'm just thinking, well, we are 5-0 on Karma. Why should we not show G2 why people should ban it against us? Because it's proven pick for us. Yeah, they know we're going to first pick it. We know we're going to first pick it, but it's so strong for us. Then let's just lock it in. Let's not try to be unpredictable just to be unpredictable.
Okay. Right, what about this then, Grabbz? The way we could also transition this conversation is, I'll just do one of my classic Thorin moves where I ask you something, but in a way that forces you to say something you probably wouldn't have otherwise. So basically, I've seen a lot of people on Reddit like earnestly saying they think Broxah should be the MVP of the split. Like they have him as the best player. Now, logically, if he's the MVP, that makes him, forget all the rest of your team, better than Jankos. So what do you think of Broxah this split?
Again, it's hard to say because now people say...
Well, is he better than Jankos?
No, higher now.
Okay, so he's not the MVP. We've cleared that up. That was quick, right? Keep going.
I have to watch more China, but right now I've struggled to see a better China than Jankos right now, anywhere. But maybe I have to watch more China for that. Even though it pains me to say that. But then again, like, this argument depends on how Fnatic communicates, because, for example, let's take our game, where Broxah is level 3 topside in the bush, while Jankos is farming, he falls behind, right? There are two options. Either Broxah actually thinks this is smart and gets a kill, and I think then he relies on the enemy being bad, and that would be a bad jungler, or it's Beepo trained like an animal in a good way, right? That's Beepo. People are the one by being in your face. If you have GP or Aatrox, he's going to trade for his life. And then calling, we both traded, we're both 10 HP, Broxah, I need you, you know? And then that makes Broxah a good jungler because he's willing to give up his jungle and try to catch back because he knows the jungle needs him. So it literally only depends on how Fnatic communicates, and there's no way to see from the outside. He's mechanically strong. Everybody can see that. So the way I see it, and the way my team operates, I would say that his laners put him in difficult spots, and he tries to make the best out of it. But of course, there's a world where he just thinks it's good to sit in a bush for 4 minutes and then be 5 camps behind. I don't know that, right? But I think he's a fine jungler for sure.
If you like, obviously, I don't want to put you too much on the spot here, but like rough. If we take this, let's obviously there's subs as well, so this makes it tricky. But let's just imagine there's only 10 junglers in the LEC, right? You don't have to go too specific, but roughly where would he be for you?
Right as a top 3, I think Jankos, Cersei, and Trick have better seasons.
Sorry, who? Cersei
so top 4 then.
Cersei and Trick.
Okay.
Yeah.
Top 4, yeah, pretty much.
Okay. Right, what do you think?
But again, as I was saying, it depends on how the team communicates, right?
Sure.
On the outside, I think it looks like their laners trade when they shouldn't, and he has to cover, which happens. And therefore he looks bad, but there's an entire world where he just doesn't know where to be.
Okay. I'll actually give Grabbz some credit. He's also got some good mind games. Like I can tell you guys both like fucking Garen. It's all about the spin, isn't it? That's all the game's about. It's time in the spin. Because here's the thing, Youngbuck. We've basically put you in a checkmate position there. You either have to admit that the laners are fucking up, in which case your boy Broxah's the king, mate, or Broxah's fucking up, in which case those poor goddamn laners, why don't they have the best jungler? Like, which do you pick? Which Sophie's Choice option is the best for you?
I would never do that.
No, I can say that in that case, there was communication from the top lane. But I also think that Wunder should have just died there. We should have been able to dive him and kill him. But yeah, then we just awkwardly stared at each other for a bit, and then Kled got the remount for free. So, yeah, my top 3 would have Jankos in it, would have Broxah, and I would probably put Mowgli on 3, maybe Xerxes. I've been scouting Xerxes, started today, finished today. I feel like he's the biggest shot caller and a big voice for Splyce. I think one thing that he lacks is proactivity. The way I see him, he's very proactively reactive. So he's continuously looking at the lanes on where he can push out or maybe counter gank, but he doesn't make action happen on his own. He doesn't tell his lanes to get in a position to actually make action happen. So
sure.
I'm not a big fan of that. I prefer people who are more proactive and constantly trying to look for opportunities to actually make plays on the map. And I think Broxah does it a lot. I think Jankos is very good at it as well. And I just think I also want to throw out there Jankos was the MVP of MSI, but he really went under the radar during that tournament, but he was the MVP of MSI.
Yep.
What about then to the more extended point, which is basically, like, actually, I think Grabbz done a great job of kind of illuminating what the divide is. The divide basically is how people see Broxah relative to how he communicates with his team. Like, if they think it's not a big deal and he's winning the game and he's doing what's right for Fnatic, then they might think he's still the best. People who are trying to essentially isolate him as a jungler and just look only at his position tend to have a natural bias towards players who are very proactive themselves. They kind of come up with the game plan. They are the ones who communicate in the sense of like, they tell you what they're going to do and what they want to do. You know, that's kind of like the divide here. I think it's a preference thing. So what would you say in that regard? Like, what is Broxah the jungler like in Summer?
I think so. Something we've been really pushing for since somewhere mid-spring is to be really active and sacrifice for the lanes instead of having lanes sacrifice for him. And I think he's done a really good job picking up on that. So it's a little bit feast or famine, but most of the times it's feast because we have really good lanes. So supporting them will almost always result in good things happening, getting plates, getting drakes, getting kills. I think in terms of communication, it's maybe 50-50 from between the lane and jungle on how proactive he is or if he's just listening to other people. And then once mid-game to late game is, he's actually a very strong voice in the communication on shot calling and what we're going to do next. So I rank that very highly in a team like this because we need someone to know all the macro concepts, and it has to be almost always has to be jungle or support. And I think he's capable of leading games, so I value that extremely highly. I don't know if other junglers can do it at the same level. Maybe Jankos can, but I don't see many other teams having a jungler that can do that.
Wait, does Broxah lead games?
In mid to late game,
he means late on. He's the macro voice.
He's a strong voice.
Or
He's not the only voice in the team.
Yes,
because we actually have 5 people capable of communicating and leading a game, depending on who's strong and who's not. But like the support and jungle are involved in every macro play, so you'll hear him every minute of the game.
So, basically, here's the communication there, Veteran. Listen, I'm obviously got my own system, haven't I? I take what people say, retranslate it, let the other person know in their fucked up terminology. So here's what they're saying, basically, Veteran, is since to them, jungle and support are both having this key impact on what Fnatic's doing, I would imagine they would imagine, since actually, to be fair, you aren't hitting on Fnatic, you give a lot of credit to Hylissang. You actually said, aside from MikyX, he might be one of the best support players in the world. So they're sort of saying that you're putting too much of the credit on Hylissang. And in this case, supposedly it's incidental and he just happens to get these really strong champions. And you're maybe missing some of the things that Broxah is doing because you've given the credit to someone else, basically.
These aren't even necessarily his best champions, but his best champions aren't really in meta. I do remember a period where he was like only playing Braum, but these are the best champions for like the way that Fnatic played now kind of deal, as opposed to Hylissang's isolated best champions. I don't think this is actually the meta where you'd see Hylissang at his peak. Also, this actually does come into like a stylistic mismatch between me and some other analysts, is that I really value how early game setups are done, and what he just said in terms of Broxah's doing the communication, or at least part of the communication mid to late game. It's like, yeah, I'd expect that because I'm pretty sure Hylissang is the one that is picking up all of the slack in the early game. Especially just based around the map moves that he is making, which is something that only like MikyX is as consistent in, and Hylissang gets in really tight windows that I don't see under support even like having to do. So I think it's more about like how heavy like I value early game plays and early game movements and early game understanding, which isn't, in fairness, like 2018 Fnatic wasn't really like a giga early game team. I don't know what your opinion on that is, but I didn't really interpret you guys as like really being like a super strong early game team. You were kind of like an AFK to 6, but then your initial rotations were always quite good. Like your early to mid transition phase was actually really good, which made up for your like poor early game. Here you have like ways that you are now playing the early game. You brought up your spring stuff, and I identified stuff in summer that you're doing, and I do see like a lot of that coming from Hylissang. So it's like a significant development, by the way, everyone watching, from how Fnatic were back in 2018, which explains why they were able to like maintain the lead that they had, because this has always been a team that historically has been very good once the map starts opening up. Like, yeah.
Okay. Let me think.
I actually do want him to like tell me like what he.
No, I'm about to ask him. Yeah, so Youngbuck. Basically, I'll even throw my hat in the ring. One of the reasons why it's not pure speculation is because Fnatic did release actually some of the comms from some of your games, if you remember. And I remember watching those VODs, and the thing I found most interesting was it did sound like most of the early game calls, etc., was Hylissang saying you want to do something or make a roam or get ready for me and stuff. Like, it did seem like it's in line with what he's saying.
I don't know which VODs those are.
This is from spring, I think, to be fair.
Okay, because
yeah.
I don't think that there's one voice that is like catching the slack or anything. I think the laners are very strong in communicating what they want. I think especially Bwipo and Hilly are always looking for action. They're the two playmakers in our team. We're always like, come here, look now, look, I'm doing something. So in that regard, that's like the 50% where Broxah is following, and then the other 50% where he's making plans like, okay guys, I'm going to do these camps, reset, and we're going to play on the bot side river. I'm going to put down my pink line with you. I'm going to get mid prio, and then we're going to play for Drake, these kind of things.
He says all that, Veteran, didn't you hear him?
Yeah.
That was like paraphrase pretty much. From
Yeah,
the game,
like I know what I want to say, but I don't think I say it.
What Veteran's going to do now is go through the VODs. This is how next level he is. He's going to get the VODs. He's going to go Blade Runner style. He's going to look at the face cam and he's going to look at every movement and see if his lips move. He's going, no, he didn't do it. Hylissang was talking. It was Hylissang the whole time. I knew it. He's going to end up like that wall with Charlie Day out.
I actually genuinely didn't know. I genuinely didn't know that they like released VODs, by the way, with like comms last.
I'd have to remember the context, but there definitely was at least one. I think there might even have been two. Now I think they did it like maybe towards the end of the split where it was. I can't remember. Maybe one was even a scrim, but whatever the context was, you did get like a real game, and you could hear the comms basically. I
don't want to call you like a liar. It's the thing, and it's like really difficult thing to like talk about unless I like literally listen to your comms and stuff. So it's kind of between a rock and a hard place there. But like what Thorin said, like if that is what the VOD showed, that wouldn't surprise me whatsoever because of the amount that he does, and it still doesn't really change the fact that I know that he is sacrificing camps that he should sacrifice this split as opposed to like last split. Yeah, that is getting better. There are still multiple instances where he isn't, whereas there are players now like Inspired where it's just a second nature thing to them, and these guys haven't had multiple splits on a world-class team to be able to develop this. Like Inspired made the same decision against you guys to give up Krugs in favor of the top lane state, and then 5 seconds later Broxah doesn't make the exact same decision in like the exact same game. Like there are
by the way, just as an aside,
make these decisions really well, you know.
Just as a quick aside, anyone watching the VOD right now who's thinking, why is he referencing things from specific games that like which jungle tactics? Fuck you, whoever's watching this VOD now, because you guys always complain when I do my shows with the other people that we make just generalised statements and we don't provide evidence. Veterans over here fucking memorising the camps he took and telling you exactly what he did. Like, if you don't like that, then you obviously, like, I think the lady doth protest too much, you motherfuckers. Anyway, that's just the thing that tilts me, I'm afraid. So, right, Youngbuck, I'm guessing you don't remember like that exact fucking rogue game, so we can't really address whether Inspired does that particularly. What do you think, though? Because one of the reasons, by the way, I'll add this in as well, this is another part that makes the whole topic contentious, is I know this is exactly what Kelsey got in trouble with, basically, when she was arguing with Loco, is because Loco tried to get Kelsey to literally rank where Broxah is on like an absolute level. Like, was he number 5 or is he number 4? And basically, she actually didn't do that, but Loco made the mistake I think she did. What she essentially said was he'd be number 5 in the LEC, but there might be like 3 players who are at the same level. That was kind of her point. So basically, if I tie it all in, one of the interesting things about LEC for me is even some of the bottom teams in the league have what look like pretty good junglers, especially for their teams. So what about that then? Contrasting Broxah against the other junglers in the league? Because to be fair, it's a pretty strong crop of players, I think.
I think there are very few junglers that can play the style we try to get Broxah to play. At least when I look at other junglers, I feel like there's only maybe 3 or 4 good junglers in Europe, maybe 5.
Who would fit a Fnatic style if they had to play for some reason?
Okay, Jankos would probably be the only one currently in LEC that would fit the style that we want our jungler to play.
Okay.
And then there's 2 people who are not in LEC who are also contracted by Fnatic, who I think would do a really good job playing for Fnatic.
What is there that you think the others wouldn't do? Like is there some nuance we're missing to what you have to do if you're Broxah, basically?
I think it's just reading the map, looking at the lane states at the right times, having good reset timers, which was an issue in spring. I know you've mentioned that before, Veteran. You're very right. Skipping the camps at the right times. I feel like not many junglers know how to do this properly and when to be in the right place. It's very, very vague, but at the same time, it's very difficult to go into a specific moment in this case. Sure.
Yeah, I just wanted a general tendency.
Yeah, both Inspired and Selfmade can do it as well. Selfmade can even continue to do it this split. I don't think that's where SK has gotten weak. I don't think it's him getting weaker. I think it's that Dreams isn't unlocked on the map so much. I think he did a lot for them that is undervalued. I think... God, man.
Let me ask you a question, though, Veteran. I'll give you a little bit of pushback on that. Because here's the one thing I would say, I think it's an obvious comment to make, is you say Selfmade and Inspired can do that, but they are going to have far less opportunities to do that in their teams.
I mean, they will. I see them make these decisions.
No, but I mean, their team doesn't even have leads in late games in certain times. So as a result, they're going to be in, essentially, you're taking the few times they do really well and expanding it across what they could do.
I mean, you can see these kinds of decisions that he's talking about in terms of I'll give up camp because the top lane state is bot lane set or the mid lane set, you can see those in isolation outside of the then subsequent execution of the play.
Right.
You know, like stuff like that you can see in isolation, even if like the execution of the play itself is like
Fair
bad.
enough.
You know, like I don't do results-based analysis. It's really fucking lazy. I want to say Cold pre-Rift Rivals 100% does that, especially if you're just talking about like checking every lane and stuff like this. Watch Cold's pro view. That's fucking mental. The only one that's more mental is Jankos, actually, in that regard. And he's not even using fucking F keys for it, as far as I can tell. Like, every he does is
he manually moves it around.
He seems to because he does a lot of checking
Fair
on
enough.
specific wards. So it's more like he's way more used to doing that, which you don't bind to a certain key. You know, you don't check wards on certain keys. He's like always fucking checking. And watching him, it's like having a fucking stroke, to be honest. In pro view at least. I do think there are junglers here that can do that. In terms of giving up camps and all of the things you say, I am actually going to have to say casual, which is obviously the meme answer everyone has been waiting for. I just wanted to know if I commit to that towards the end there, but like, I mean, genuinely, he does do those decisions, even if he doesn't execute all the time properly. But I would also say that's kind of like a lie. That's
Wait a minute, isn't that also like? Here's the question, I guess, Veteran. This is the part I'm confused about. Is the execution also implying that their laners need to do something with them?
Basically, what everything Youngbuck is saying is to do with being at the right place at the right time.
Right, that's like exactly. Then we've
really
nailed
nice
it.
way to distill it. Okay.
So here's the problem:
if you do all that right, you'll be at the right place at the right time. But just because you're at the right place at the right time doesn't mean you can play your champ up.
Right, that's the part I don't understand. If you're saying Cajal and Inspired and Self-Made could all make the right decision and be at the right place, but then you just sort of like trail off and say, but you know, execution of it. It's like, wait a minute, execution is everything.
Saying,
like unless they can execute it, they wouldn't be as good as Broxah, surely.
Well, that isn't even what Youngbuck said. Youngbuck said that this is the style that they want their jungler to do.
Right.
Yeah. That they try to get him to do. He's not even saying that he executes it perfectly all the time, because if he did say that, then that would be a bit of a lie. But there's also stuff to do with like the synergy between the laners here, which is why he referenced Bwipo's communication at one point, you know?
Right.
Because this, like, the jungler can be at the right place at the right time, but if you don't have like this intrinsic inbuilt synergy that like the Chaos Animal House Farm Fest that is G2 is apparently has like in droves, then that ultimately is meaningless, and that's what people are unable to divorce from reality when they assess junglers. That's what people are unable to divorce in their heads. I mean, when they try to assess junglers. So.
Can I throw something in? I'm waiting.
Yeah, come on.
Go on.
So I have to talk about Worlds 2018 for that to work. Because you mentioned that you look at junglers and you see their early game pathing and how to play a game, right? So we came to Korea for bootcamp. We just come to Korean team, of course, don't want to say who. And basically, in the EU, everything was wild and nobody had a clue. And in Korea, it was really hard that the laners only trade with junglers, right? So very predictable, but you can't punish it at all.
Yeah.
Right. There's a system, and then the jungler can make his path, and he dictates the game.
Yep.
And then you can say he's a good jungler or not. So now, Youngbuck knows him. I have Caps, I have Mickey, he is Hylissang. So even if the jungler makes a plan, if they see a good trade, they will take that trade. And they will tell you, okay, we're both low now, first jungler wins the game. And that's just how the team plays the game. But that's true. And
Did it serve? But so you get to say first.
I mean, of course, they do it in the boundaries of the game, right? They're not going to run it down. Let's say, for example, the death of Perkz against Fnatic, the first one was out of boundaries because we know Broxah's bot side, we know he's on the blue, and they trade and they die for it, right? Of course, it happen mistakes. But that's what Youngbuck mentioned, that Jankos especially, I think, is really insane in having no downtime in terms of helping his laners while farming, and that's insanely hard.
Yeah. And
again, you can say this jungler X here is good pathing because he can dictate how he wants to move. In G2, it's more like not a specific scenario where against Fnatic, Caps, Insects, TF, level 6. Jankos legit says, one more camp and level 6, the game is over. While he turns around, you see Caps flying forward and Insect getting TF. You know? Because he sees that opportunity, and that's good, and Jankos reacts to it. But then, again, it's just a different style of jungling. And I think that's also what Broxah is doing. That, sure, he could say, I want to do these 3 paths, we have pressure there, we can trade there. Nothing will happen because both teams respect it. Or you have crazy players like Hylissang and from Scrims, Nemesis also takes aggressive trades.
And Repo.
So if everyone, or Repo, Repo level 1, Repo just also in your GP. So it's not as clear-cut to say, oh, the jungler had bad pathing. It's more like he has to react every second to what the game is giving him.
Yeah.
So I think like in weaker teams, it's easy to praise a good jungler because in those teams, the coach will say, don't do trades when the jungler's not around.
Right.
That's like, yeah, and that's also like why I made the distinction with Inspired, where like I think he's like very, very good around the map, but I think that his plans are like bad. Like basically what you would dictate as like the standard like pathing that he does, I think is not actually optimal in most games more often than not. But the way that he reacts to the way that the game flow changes is very, very good, which is good because he often fucked up the game flow himself early game. But his reactions to it is very good. So like, whereas you could make Inspired do this, I'm also basically trusting that you would be able to teach him how to path properly in the early game, Youngbuck. But Inspired could do like all of the rest of reading the map stuff. And I do think you have to make a distinction there. Jankos is obviously almost the entire package in this sense, where he has really good pathing, and at the same time he's incredibly intuitive around the map and reacts to map states so well. And he even reacts, as you were saying, like if Caps decides that he wants to make a montage play really, really well, even right down to a mechanical level. But that's almost entirely unique to Jankos. I'm also assuming that Jankos is like incredibly communicative at like every stage of the game because he at least was on HGK. So I could see why you would always like put him down as like the MVP candidate because that's incredibly critical to being the thing that makes G2 work, you know? But I also think that because I just mentioned Dreams as well, right? I think there are a lot of supports that have impacted the map a lot. I think this split particularly was a split that Fnatic correctly identified as one where it's possible to have the support impact the map in a significant way. I think MikyX has always been doing this in really, really narrow pockets and really narrow windows, and that's why I really value MikyX as highly as I do. I obviously you'll disagree, I think, in terms of like MVP candidate, but this is why I rate him so highly because he basically counters all of them at their own game, and he has been doing so in super narrow windows for a long ass time. So,
okay,
of course, it's insane too. Like Miky is the best support in EU. So there's no question for me there. So sure, but again, the point was being from an outside perspective, it's just impossible, I think, to rate junglers.
Okay.
Unless it's this Korean style, which I wanted to also mention at PGL, but I got cut off. That just because, like, this idea of perfect league where nothing happens and you slowly outscale, I think even back then was not right. It's just that nobody could punish it really, and the players got better and better mechanically.
And also, you know, some of the best teams in the world did it, so it was just accepted that that must be the best way to play the game, right?
Yeah, and I think. And on a bigger scale, it's the same thing that happens to us right now, that some teams give up level 1 against G2. Like the lower teams in the LEC, they're like, one bad trade, it's fucking over. Let's go next, you know? The same thing with maybe SKT, you know, they could play safe and still get something back then because the teams were like, shit, this is SKT, they believe.
Sure.
So yeah, judging junglers is really hard for me.
What if we transition then? What if we talk about something not at all contentious? Like, who's better, Perkz or Rekkles?
You can go first.
I think Rekkles is a better AD carry, and I think that Perkz is a better mage player and has a much bigger champion pool because of his mid lane experience. So it really depends what you want from your team. If you want someone to hard carry on a crit AD carry, you take Rekkles. And if you want more flexibility in your lane and play around your mid lane or solo lane more, then you go for Perkz.
This guy's a fucking monster at marketing,
Yes.
and he's just amazing. I don't know how he's doing it, so whatever. Go on, keep going. What do you think, Grabbz? What do you think on that? He's kind of trapped you again there, but
holy fuck.
I guess essentially what he's done is like he said, if you make it one or the other, maybe one's better at one and one's at the other. But the real question is, which he kind of avoided, is which is overall better?
I mean, that's Perkz. If you want somebody to backlines and doesn't die, which to be fair is not easy, you take maybe Rekkles. But if you want early game impact, if you want good laning, if you want shampoo, if you want flexibility, if you want the whole package, then I don't see why you would pick Rekkles or Perkz ever. Like for me, again, it looks kind of like shitting on him, but Rekkles is really good in like in team fights. Don't get me wrong, but
Sure.
I think he's replaceable until mid game a lot. Like I don't think Fnatic bot lane is really good at laning. That's also why the roaming style just fits. Whereas sure, Perkz sometimes dies in lane, but at the same time he also solo kills you whenever he can. That's not something I see often Rekkles do. And if he does, then it's mostly Hylissang facilitating that, whereas it's Perkz and Miky at the same time for us. Then also, I think Perkz is the best AD in playing mid. not champ pool wise, but if you play 1v1 setting or something, Perkz is the one who understands the best where he can catch the wave and where to disappear to, often to a fault. For example, when he died against Fnatic when Beepo came. There he misjudged that, but often we get more pressure because he realizes he can be standing like under the tower and be safe, which others really don't. Like I think back now TSM Series Westman is under his tier 2, even though he could be pushing forward and catching the wave a bit earlier. So of course it's biased because I see Perkz every day, but I don't see how Rekkles is better.
Yeah, maybe a little bit biased the other way. But I see a lot of scrims, and if there's one place on the map where it's a really big discrepancy, I would say it's the bot lane. So I think your bot lane is quite
You
exposed.
see our scrims against each other, and you know you can't take them as a bar for anything. Let's be honest.
Well, if I can't do that, then, you know.
I mean, take the stage games then. Best of 5 in Athens, and then we can talk afterwards. But I think, yeah.
Deal.
Is the bot lane not like for example, Youngbuck? The bot lane's not the strength of G2, not the one they play around the most.
No, I think it's their weakness, and for that being their weakness, it means they're a really good team because it's still a very strong duo lane. So just to be clear, but
just relatively, you mean, yeah.
If there's one lane you can abuse, it's probably going to be bot lane.
Okay.
We showed against Vitality.
You could try it again. Best of
we'll
5. You can try it with bot lane and we see how it goes for you. But sure.
Yeah, and then you can ban out all the spot champions, Grabbz, right? We've got the deal here. Everyone knows what we're doing in the playoffs. We've got the match set up. It's a show match. Yeah, let's do it.
I think it's going to happen. Either we trade Rakan and Pyke, or nobody gets any one of those two, and then we see how the lane goes as well.
Well, you see, I happen to know that you cannot really play Pyke into Rakan, so
there's another challenge, right?
Maybe Hylissang can't. But...
Someone get the checklist out. We're going to have like a bingo card for this playoff match when it happens, boys. Let's see how many of these things come up again. Right, Veteran, where do you come down on this? Because actually, to be fair, it's been a while since we even had that discussion about like Perkz, Rekkles, etc. And actually, I'm interested to see where you'll go this one. Like, I personally, if I have to guess, I think you might edge it to Rekkles. That's just my take. What do you think?
I agree with Youngbuck that he will have an easier time trying to abuse bot than any other lane, but I disagree that he can win the game versus G2's bot. I just happen to think his best players are bot lane. I think they're both top 2 players. And the only reason I'm not saying they're top 1 players is because I think that they're on G2's side. I think that the thing with Perkz, it's a good characterization of the marksman versus the mage thing. But the thing is that kind of implies that Perkz is like not necessarily up to par on marksman, but the difference between him on marksman and Rekkles on marksman is actually kind of minimal, especially compared to some other gigantic gulfs in skill in the league, whereas the difference between Rekkles on mages and Perkz on mages is a gigantic gulf that is not going to be passed in the next 2 years by Rekkles, even if he starts right now only playing mages. That's just not going to happen. So I'd have to put it in Perkz' favor almost every time. I think MikyX is the most mechanically gifted support Europe has ever seen. I really do love Hylissang, I really do, but I think MikyX is like a unique talent in this point. I think you would have absolutely had a point in spring. Because in spring, Perkz was still kind of learning the mechanics of bot lane itself, but that was a point where you could really see the strength of MikyX as a laner. Like, he was really fixing things for Perkz while Perkz got used to it, but there was a point in MSI during the group stage where it really clicked for Perkz, and Perkz was starting to really win bot lane as opposed to just winning on the basis of being good at his champion and the basis of MikyX always being around to fix things. And I think after we passed that point, Perkz became the best bot laner, or the best AD carry, I guess. I mean, I think MikyX is the best guy in your lane, but I think Perkz became the best in his role, like in the league at that point, because of the gigantic gulf between mids and AD carries when it comes to mages, and because at 816, Riot decided that all marksmen needed to be nerfed to the ground and burst is king. So I think Perkz is king at what is actually best bot lane because Riot said so years ago, and I don't think Rekkles is anywhere near as good at the things he needs to be as good at. And I think if it did go swing back to a marksman meta, I'm very sure that Perkz mechanically will be up there very, very, very fast. It's just right now, I actually think he's right when he says that like marksmen are not that good bot. I think the exceptions are Xayah. I think Xayah Rakan is like ridiculous, to be honest. And the recent patch that came out kind of leans things even further in Perkz' favor in how he assessed it on PGL. So that's where I come down on it. I do think G2 have an advantage there. Though I do think if you are going to like win through a lane, it's going to be bot, because I think they're the best players on your team. But ultimately, I think the better players are still on G2.
I will say, by the way, if you notice one trend that comes out of all these discussions, especially when people can give you actual insight as to how people inside the team see it, is it looks a lot easier to figure out who a good player is when they play on a bad team, obviously. Like, if all these guys were playing with the worst support in the league, it'd be more blatant as to who is. But since they've got the two best supports in the league, you can't even necessarily extract them from that. Like, they do play in a lane with someone else. Then they have junglers. Like, there's so many interactions you have to sort of filter out or ignore practically to make the distinction who's better.
Yeah.
Well,
Should we talk about another team now? It's all right. Should we talk about another team now? Oh, I've got a quick question for you, actually. Just one for Youngbuck.
Okay.
Right? What do you think of how G2 uses caps versus how Fnatic used to use caps?
I think in our team he was further up the lane and way more aggressive than he is right now. Maybe, I don't know if that's meta related, because it is Corki as your meta. I don't feel he is as big of a threat as he was last year, but then again, once again, it's probably meta related, because last year it was Aurelia, Kali, Aatrox meta. Other than that, I know that Caps is just always going to need a lot of resources to be stopped, and even then you're not going to stop him. He's always going to be really good in the game. But I don't really see that big of a difference. I still think that G2 plays a lot around mid lane, especially jungle support. They're off of base. The first thing they do is run to mid and make sure that he's fine and control either top or bot side of the river with their pings. And I think that's something we tried to do as well last year. I think G2 is probably a little bit better at it than we were last year, but other than that, it's pretty much the same.
What do you think, Grabbz?
I mean, he's just caps, right? He's like a ticking time bomb, so if you don't play around him, he's gonna flip it at some point.
That's the one thing I guess actually I do find weird,
I'm
Grabbz.
joking, right?
No, but in a way that's actually something I want to ask, is because on the one hand, obviously, if Caps does something great and the jungler supports there and they get the kill, it looks like, what a genius, he's so aggressive, the killer instinct, but it's like you were describing before, he will also probably go for some of these players when they aren't actually there, and if the jungler doesn't sort of go like, it's like a mother, you know, is taking something out of the oven and then the little kid's just running out the door and they're like, fucking all right, running out. It's like, you know, is there any of that? Do you have to sort of protect Caps a bit?
It got better. Like, in scrims, he still doesn't care if his solo laner can carry or not. Like, if he's not bottom as elite or top as elite, he doesn't care. He just goes all in and flips it. But in stage, at least, it got way better that he can actually play conservative if he needs to. Because maybe, of course, if you win a championship with SI, you know your teammates are insane. So if Wonder is elite, you play through Wonder. If Bot is elite, you play through Bot, and it's fine. As I said already in the last shows, I was really surprised when he came how communicative he is. So he's really good at communicating when he can actually press elite. And then, of course, Jankos is also a guy who is smart enough to deny the request of coming if he knows it's bad, right?
Right.
So he doesn't have a dog jungler. Like, I don't want to say Broxah is a dog jungler, but maybe the synergy was just
Of course
there.
not. Don't ever do it.
No, we didn't want to say that, like, honestly.
Yeah, fair enough.
It's just that Jankos is also strict enough in communication that he makes clear, okay, Caps, I can't help you right now. Just catch the wave in base. And then he will do that, right? So I think it also comes down to how his teammates talk to him, that he can play a bit more passive if he needs to. But of course he doesn't want to, so...
Okay.
If he can,
who knew Youngbuck the whole time? Apparently it was possible to calm him down. We're only learning this now.
I wouldn't say it's possible. It's... Youngbuck knows him as well, right? Same thing, like in draft, for example, the same thing happened to them with the Vayne pick. The Talon pick came out of nowhere. You're like, it's Caps. You have to trust him at that point. And if he wants to go in, he goes in. If he sees something, he will go for it. And again, as I said on a different show, I think it's a really rare spot where we are, where everybody thinks his teammates are insane. It sounds very simple, but very often in one team, you have one star player who then even only subconsciously thinks lower of his teammates, and then therefore leads the game more aggressively. Whereas in G2, if Miky says he can go, if Wonder says he can go, everybody will follow because they trust him to do the right decision. Right?
Sure.
So therefore, also if Caps hears, okay, go bot, now we can end the game here, he will just do that, not think about his lane.
Yeah. I would even say that's one area where I know it's like a hackneyed comparison, but that's one area where I do see some similarities between IG when they were very good and G2 as well. It's like, it's all well and good saying like, oh, they're just having amazing skirmishes and fights. It's like in a lot of teams, they wouldn't follow up like that. Like, yeah, I could tell you teams right now in the LCS where half the time when their teammate goes in, they're like doing like the mathematical equation in the air in front of themselves. Like, actually, fuck this guy. I'm going to sort of slowly go in, let him die and pull out. Like, I won't name which teams they are, but you fucking see it a lot in the game, It's like you can't take for granted the idea of everyone actually trusting everyone in a team. That's a pretty rare scenario. And in your scenario, like you're saying, Grabbz, it's not even just trust, it's the idea of actually thinking, even my teammate's insane. So actually, whatever he does, even if it's not my idea, fuck it, we'll just do it.
Yeah.
I mean, you can never develop if you don't have like a team like that, or at least you can never ever match GC's development if you yourself do not have a team that is willing to go in on calls like that. Because you will be stuck in post scrim discussion so much trying to figure out if this was the right move or not. But that will never be a question for G2. They'll know if it was the right move or not, and they will know if they should have gone in on the call or not. But it won't be like, I won't go in on your call. It will be that the guy there will just be trusted not to make the call anymore. Like, it's so much easier to develop a team if everyone is decisive in that man. If they are decisive as 5, so the vast majority of players that make it are decisive as individuals. And if you have a team that's like that, then yeah, you'll just out-accelerate anyone like very, very fast.
Let's talk about some other teams now. There are other teams in the league, believe it or not. I know it's often hard to imagine as much. In fact, believe it or not, crazy statement here, guys. These two teams might not even play in the final. Maybe someone will beat one of them. Maybe that would happen. I know everyone does that classic thing that they love to do, which I've never understood in League of Legends. Because one of the things I learned very quickly when I came over to League of Legends from other games, remember I followed games like Quake, Counter-Strike, StarCraft. These are incredibly consistent games as to who wins the game. Because, like, for example, the most obvious part is the game in League of Legends is one huge unit. Like, if you start out badly, in Counter-Strike, obviously, like, you can just have the gun on the next round and then suddenly it's even again, and sure, the score's against you, but the game isn't against you. So I've always thought people massively overvalued the idea, like, this team can never beat this team. It's like, mate, did anyone not see ANX fucking from the wildcard region beat the best team in the world, who were the fucking champions of Korea? Like, that happened. Like, that wasn't imaginary. I didn't imagine that. That can happen, even in League. So in light of that, let's talk about some of the other contenders. Let's talk about Splyce, because obviously you've kind of seeded this and made it interesting, because Grabbz mentioned Cersei and put him in his top group. In fact, I think he even put him above Broxah. And you actually didn't give your thoughts much on Cersei, Youngbuck, but you kind of seemed like a bit skeptical. So what do you think of Splyce?
I think Splyce is a team with a few really strong individuals. A team that does not seem to have strong macro fundamentals, especially mid to late game. I would say even early game, actually. I do think highly of Cersei, but that's mainly because when you look at the pro view, you see that he's the one doing maybe 90% of the shot calling and just about all the communication. They communicate a lot with pings. So in that regard, I think highly of Cersei. I don't think he's very proactive. Yeah. Proactively ganking, proactively setting up Drakes, proactively setting up Heralds. He's just covering lanes when he thinks they need covering, and I think that's part of the reason why they're not really good at accelerating games.
Okay.
I mean, I can just add to that. I can see where you're coming from, especially, but I think that, again, coming back to systems, would be a systematic approach, because I think Splyce as a team, for example, plays heavily around item power spikes. So even if the lead of Copper doesn't have 3 items, they're not going to do anything.
Yeah.
They're going to farm it up. So you can say, of course, it's Cersei's fault for not being proactive, but maybe just the team philosophy in that regard. That he's mainly there to cover first and get sure that Kobe gets to those items, so he will not get to those items. I think in that regard, he does a great job. So looking at how Splyce plays the game, I think he fits that system early really well. So that's why I think he's strong.
Right, that sounds, by the way, both of you said things there that sound like knocks. Like, for example, like they don't have particularly good macro, Youngbuck said. You just said there they have this system where they play around the item spikes and they won't do anything if they don't have them at times. Right, they have won a lot of fucking games for a team that in theory has to use a system in this regard and has these weaknesses. So why haven't people been able to punish them when most people would imply the meta goes against that, actually?
That is a good question. I think they have... they're probably just good at the playstyle. It's hard to make proactive plays on them. Maybe because of the way that Cersei is playing. I don't necessarily see it, but I think it's a lot of individual star power relative to the other teams in the LEC, where I think they, on an individual level, almost outrank every playoff team on every role. But other than that, I don't really see anything specific that they do that is really threatening to a team. Like if I scout them, like which I have been doing recently, because we play them, it's not like, wow, I really have to be careful for this. They're really good at this. At this part of the game, wow, they're just really good at team fighting. They're good at scaling, keeping some kind of control of the game. But then again, at some point you match against a G2 or Fnatic who have better individuals and better team fighting, and then the dream is over.
Yeah, I think this is one of the rare occasions where I agree with Veteran, where he said that Splyce is just like, I know how you called it in your article, but this gatekeeper team. Like,
The gatekeepers, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. They're good at what they do, but as Youngbuck said, they're not excellent.
Yeah.
So they look good as long as their team is not better in those regards. They play, and this would be the same criticism I had towards, for example, Korean teams, where they also play to the same style. For example, if they have a mid-game comp, they will play to mid-game. They will not take chances in the early game, and I think that's a big mistake in current meta. And I think Splyce plays the same way, where a really good team would see a certain, let's say, a guy being out of position, collapsing on him, having faster resets, but they're just very stable, right? And in a best of one, where one game decides being a stable team is not the worst setup, let's say.
Sure.
Because these outliers won't happen often, and you have your basic level very often. Therefore, you win those games. So yeah, I think they're a good team in the league. But as Youngbuck said, I don't think there's anything like, oof, they're really good there. We can learn from them in that regard. We have to be careful about certain scenarios.
Sure. Right, Veteran, what about this? When last split, there was times when Splyce was 4th or they were 5th, you know, like they were around that area and then they were moving up as the split went on, right? It was funny then that they had this style and these strengths, because then you could be like, haha, look, it's what an LCS team would be like if it was in LEC. Right, that's not as funny anymore, Veteran, when most of the teams in the league can't stop that. Like that makes EU look like it is G2 and Fnatic, mate. That makes it look like people are actually overvaluing the region, because how are all these other teams, including your beloved Origen, they aren't doing much against this?
Okay, so, all right. Okay, how do I answer your question? Okay, I was very prepared to answer your initial question of just straight up, how are they winning? And I'm going to interpret what you just said as like, how the fuck are they winning? Splyce are still, as they were last split, very, very good at targeted plans versus certain teams. They are very good at recognizing how systematically you guys play, and they are very good at tailoring a plan around that. The problem is that, as you both have correctly identified, the underlying philosophy behind what's optimal for Splyce is actually flawed. However, if you are taken apart, if your system kind of fails, then they will have an advantage over you. The problem is that Splyce are targeting teams to beat them and win, whereas I'm very sure, and Rekkles actually brought this up on PGL, and it actually makes a lot of sense to me now because I was modeling Origen under this, but actually, the more I think about it, the more it makes sense as to why like Rogue would change their priorities at one point, why like, I mean, it just makes like a lot of sense. Every other team is trying to catch up with G2. Like, Splyce are trying to win really hard in a best-of-1 scenario. They're doing very, very targeted plans to do so. They're adapting their team for whatever they are facing, whatever these guys have brought out to show as their most optimal thing, they will counter. But every other team is busy just trying to become the best version of themselves that they can be, or the best clone of G2 that they can be, because everybody now realizes that there's a ceiling that only G2 can really hit, because they are very fluid in the way that they play the game, which lanes they want to play around, blah, blah, blah. And Splyce are the only ones that are not trying to do that. Splyce have an underlying philosophy that is going to be their win condition at the end of the day. So as long as they can diffuse your system and then allow themselves to make it to that point, because you guys are not going to do the things that you do to accelerate the game, then they'll win. And that's how they're beating teams. And they were always good at that. And I think now it's even better because so many teams are trying to do what Misfits did in 2017 and just like have the menial split, qualify for playoffs, and then book it all the way to the fucking finals and make it to Worlds. I think a lot of teams are just trying to develop. Rekkles brought this up in PGL, and I actually think it makes like a lot of sense now. So
this episode might be called Splyce Attack of the Clones.
Okay.
Because it also had a lot of very boring planning as well, quite frankly, before the clones attacked. So, and it was a very flawed movie. The script was quite frankly garbage. But, there was good elements. Like, those Jedis are doing pretty well at the end,
True, they were. The Jedis end up winning, sort of, for the wrong side. Wait, I'm not gonna bother.
Who really knows? Who really knows what's going on that? Yeah, come on.
To the analogy about Splyce being an A team, which is not true because Humanoid actually knows what side lane is.
He does, but his movements within side lanes are nowhere near as good as like NateDOhDoubleG's. Like NateDOhDoubleG is still very good at that.
Yeah, but that's what I'm talking about NA right now. So even compared to that,
never
so
mind.
They would be the best NA team.
Yeah, never mind. Continue.
Liquid is. I mean, still saying
Liquid has very good players, obviously. So I think that would probably counteract it. Sure.
No, I mean Liquid is just a good team overall.
They're a pretty good team, but to be fair, here's the problem, Grabbz. I don't want to make this an LCS podcast, obviously. I mean, for a start, Veteran doesn't always watch it, so it's not interesting. But I'll just say this, is the problem is, because Liquid has amazing players and they win all the games, like, people probably wouldn't apply some of the criticisms that you would apply to teams like Splyce, because in their league, that's just how it's played.
No, yeah, you're right. But, I mean, we met them, right? At MSI, so I can say convincingly that they're a good team. Even to European standards. So
that's what's weird is he even when he said that, like I thought he was being sarcastic. He was like, "We met him, and in the final, well, you see, they're a very good team, at least for European standards." Like, but what's weird is I know he was being genuine. He actually was trying to big them up there, even though he was talking about when he shit stomped them completely, and they mentally broke and weren't even doing anything like Game 3. So
at the same, I mean, we also shit stomped Origen. Right? And Origen is a good team in Europe. Well, at that point, was a good team in Europe.
Yeah, good counterpoint.
And also coming after SKT, where like we fought tooth and nails. Of course, Liquid is going to be a bit easier, right? But no, like they have good fundamentals. They have good players. Of course, hard to judge in the NA environment, as you said. But I respect them a lot, and there's no sarcasm in that.
Fair play. Right, let's talk about some other teams then. So, unfortunately, the downside is, if you talk about all the rest of the teams in the league relative to each other, it's a really interesting discussion. There's all these stylistic differences, the star players are in different positions, a lot of them can beat each other, hence why the playoff race is so close. The problem is, though, if we're saying Splyce is flawed, I feel like a lot of what talking about these other teams is also going to be talking about the flaws of these other teams. So if we talk about the next team down in the league, Grabbz, the Schalke team is a team where they have a lot of criticism about them, even though they also have won quite a few games, although admittedly they won a lot of them earlier in the split. So what do you think of Schalke? Because obviously they're a team locked in for the playoffs already. Like, you can't say they've been bad objectively.
Okay, first of all, because I'm aware that everything sounds cocky, right? I feel like coming from the top space. We are also flawed. Like, we know G2 is flawed as fuck. Like, we have many things we can improve on. So
sure.
We're not standing here and saying, "Oh, we're the second coming of SKT."
It's like you said before. You're blessed. Like, you're like, listen, I haven't got the best teeth. I haven't even got the best lines. Got a massive dick though, and I know how to use it. That's only one thing. Yeah,
just to preface that, right? Splyce is flawed, and they're in a good spot because their teams are even more flawed. Right. I mean, that's also the way our coach should think. I think.
Yeah. Right, now you won't get the angry messages from the Splyce coaches. Well done. Right. So what about Schalke?
I couldn't care less if the one that sent any messages.
Okay.
Schalke. So Trick improved the team because now they know actually how to move on the map. Before, I mean, Youngbuck knows Luca has a really, really high regard on Trick, and he looked really bad barbecue in Turkey, so I was like, nah. But now I can kind of see where he comes from. He knows how to behave according to lane states really well. He reads the map really well as well. So kind of the same things that we praised Broxah and Jankos for. He kind of does the same things. I do think, though, looking at top teams, they have an issue in the solo lane department. Which is, and Igna also is not playing his best right now. So if Igna doesn't get like a counter cheese pick, I think their win conditions are going to become really slim going into like the higher stages of playoffs.
Okay.
But as I said, like, it just comes from a deficiency in solo lane power. So I don't see them carrying a game for that. So it has to be Trick and bot lane. And if you then target it and draft, I think they have a really slim chance.
Okay. What do you think, Youngbuck?
No, I agree with that. And on top of that, because I think they even accepted that themselves, they are extremely predictable. You know that Odomna is not going to play a carry champion top lane. He's not going to get any resources. You know that before you go into the draft. You know all you have to target is jungle and bot lane. And if you have a winning bot lane and a winning jungle, the game pretty much ends right there. And if you don't get a winning bot lane match or jungle, then there's still a really good chance you win anyway because you have much more solo lane power.
Sure. You just got to ruin Upset's life. That's all you got to do. If you do that, probably win.
That's the quickest route to victory.
Sure.
I think his life is ruined, but I don't think like Upset's the one you target. Like I agree with everything Upset said, so I think you just target jungle and like bot lane, but I think it's more like you just target jungle and support. And
I more meant that it just stylistically ruins his life, because then even if he plays well, what can fuck can you do? That's
the guy whose life gets really ruined when you target this stuff is Abadage. And Abadage has had some games where he's had some poor executions, but I think that they're just like it's so emphasized on that team because that team always goes really heavy for mid prio before they make their plays towards bot side. And obviously, when it fails, everyone just sees, oh, Abadage fucked up again. And I think he's really suffered from how everybody has been tackling Schalke. But like just off the back of what Youngbuck said, I would just bet against Fnatic versus Schalke every single time. Like, yeah, I mean, they're a simple team. Everyone's read them. I also don't think it was necessarily different last year. Not last year, last split. I don't really think the changing trick with Memento like got rid of any sort of flaws that they had back then. I don't really understand why the decision was made if it didn't like fundamentally change them, because I think the same plan you just gave would have worked last split as well. So yeah.
Right, Youngbuck, when you came on the show, it was last split, right? I think it was quite early in spring when you came on.
I think so, yeah. We were 0-5 or something. Yeah.
There we go. Yeah, by the way, fairly brave to come on. Respect. Someone in the Fnatic
came on just after he had the 2-0 week phone. Just gonna
make
Okay. Even so, coming on when you're 2-5 is still pretty legit. Listen, mate, I know a lot of people where they'd have to be 6-5 before they'd come on the show. But anyway, that's by the by. Obviously, Trick wasn't in the league at the time. So, as Grabbz alluded to, obviously you were the coach when this guy was playing in G2 and you won all those championships with him. What type of a jungler is he? Like, how from the outside, how do you speculate he probably is used in Schalke?
I don't know how he's really utilizing Schalke, but I know he's most efficient at pathing, counter jungling, and pushing out lanes. And one of the ways he achieves that is that basically every minute of his free time, he's watching VODs of other junglers. He's always studying the game. So he's always up to par with the meta and what the pathing of the enemy jungler is going to be and where they're going to be at any point in the game.
We should ask him if he thinks Broxah is that good or not. Sounds like he would know.
I mean,
except he speaks Korean or whatever, but yeah.
It's a completely different kind of style as that I want from my jungler right now in Fnatic, but I think Fnatic needs that kind of jungler like Broxah is right now.
Sure.
But yeah, I would say Trick is more farm-centric and maybe funneling more gold into him because helping out solo lanes probably doesn't get you a victory at the end of the day.
I think
at least in Schalke.
I think that
Schalke.
Yeah. I mean, I think what you're talking about is also like a broad meta thing. Like, I do think you can't really be like a farm-centric jungler in this meta, and I think that when Trick plays like his Elise games, it kind of shows he's not as good on ganking junglers as he is when he's on like Skarner. Like on Skarner, he's really, really fucking good, you know? I feel like Sylas would be a perfect champion for him, to be honest, because Sylas isn't necessarily like a hyper-aggressive early ganking jungler, but these are ultimately like worse junglers and worse jungle play styles than you should be doing right now. So...
And I think he will shine more in a meta where there's more carry junglers, because even back in G2 when it was like Graves, Kha'Zix, Nidalee meta, those are the metas that he really shines on. And I do agree that because in that regard, it's a little bit more farm-centric, champions like Skarner and Sejuani fit in really well.
Yeah.
One thing I wanted to ask about in the context of the Schalke team is, again, if you're a team that is not the absolute best team with all the best players, blah, 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 etc., it actually can also make it that the star player looks overrated. I mean, maybe they get all the resources, maybe they played through, maybe they just get their pick every single time. Obvious things that you could get an advantage in when you're not in a team with an even amount of good players, right? Is Upset actually an elite AD carry in LEC? And to tie into the earlier discussion, like, is he able to play enough of the non-AD carries that seem to be so strong in the meta at the moment?
He's that direct to that.
I think he's a top tier AD carry. I don't think he plays many mages or like things like Yasuo. So I will give him an F on that one. But I think he's still an elite AD carry. Like when it comes to marksman, he is very good.
As far as I can tell, I just looked up now, he has actually never played one in either of the splits this year. He's just only played ADCs. I mean, obviously, Kai'Sa technically not, but you know what I mean? Like, it's still counted, isn't it? Like,
And when they did Funnel, they had NateDOhDoubleG playing Funnel last year, when Funnel was like all the
so
way.
basically, I guess what I'm asking is, like, even aside from his team, would that make him overrated? Because obviously people are going to say, well, he's just the superstar player of Schalke and forget how well Schalke is doing. But if actually bot lane isn't that strong, played purely through ADCs, isn't that essentially a big weakness?
It's really hard to say because, again, bot lane is 3-2, right? And I think Igna, way back from his Misfits times, really relies on counter-picking and often with something cheesy. So I'm not on Igna hype train. I think 2v2 on bot, like he doesn't have the best support depending on how the draft goes. I think he's good. I wouldn't put him top 3 because I think Kobe's better. At least this time around, he's not like insta-picking Ezreal and Kai'Sa whenever they're available. So he's working on that channel pool issue at least. To kind of be less predictable.
Within the context, he didn't play any of the majors. He has played a lot of actual AD carry picks, though.
Yeah. He played...
Specifically. Last split, I think he played like 4. Now he's played something like 9 or something. That's pretty good.
That's what I mean. Like, he actually played only 4 in spring. And he played a bit like 8, I think. So he's getting less predictable, which is really good. But then again, I can't say if he's not as good because of Igna, or if Igna's actually better and he's struggling. I just don't think they're that strong to be 2 if they don't get counter picks in both positions.
His mechanics are absolutely there to be the best. But
sure.
There are other things that aren't necessarily there, like his last split, for example, Rekkles was like really pushing back against the narrative that he is like a passive player because they literally gave him Lucian with TP, Kai'Sa with TP. He was collapsing permanently. He was even being like the initiator on a lot of these skirmishes and fights that ultimately won Fnatic the game. Upset expects his team to do that for him. That's kind of like a mindset thing, and that's the only thing that's really gating him. When you say overrated, I'm not really sure what you mean by that, because I think he's a top 4 AD carry. Like, I think the big AD carries are Perkz, Rekkles, Patrick, Upset. So he's like within there. Like, I think he's clear above everyone else there, but I don't think he's above Rekkles, Perkz, you know? Like, and these are the tendencies that prevent him from doing it, but the mechanics are absolutely there. And also on the idea that, like, maybe he was a lot more predictable in spring. Like, I mean, I think he just got Kai'Sa every game. Kai'Sa was like a really good champion, and I think everyone was targeting, like Youngbuck says, like, you target like jungle, and you could target like support, and you could target all this stuff. Like, if you really wanted to beat Schalke, it's not Upset's champ pool that you target. You target everything that kind of enables him, because he's reliant on his team to enable him. I don't like, when I think about an AD carry that looks really good on a bottom tier team, or I mean, they're not bottom tier right now, they're like a mid tier team that I was trying to push for upper tier. But when I think of an AD carry that is not necessarily on a top team, but a guy that has been hyped up as being like a top tier AD carry, I think of like Freeze, you know, like Freeze was on Copenhagen Wolves for ages, and then he never really did like explode when he got like top tier opportunities, right? But I don't think Upset will be like that. I think the mechanics are absolutely there. And I think he just needs like the push in the right direction, and he can one day, like, if we're ever talking about Upset as the best AD carry in Europe, I wouldn't be surprised. Like, I wouldn't be surprised. It meant that he got the push that he needed. So
what about this angle? In his specific Schalke team, would they actually be a better team if he did play majors?
No,
probably.
Yeah, it doesn't fix anything.
That wouldn't affect anything. Right,
no.
Fair enough. Okay. Right, let's have the... Oh, did you have something extra out there?
Yeah, I want to say playing majors is beneficial if your solo lanes can actually carry, or you can play towards both sides. So if Odo would suddenly become a carry player, then playing majors would be beneficial. But since they play through him anyways, or try to, that wouldn't make much of a difference.
Yeah.
Sure. That's also the reason why I've noticed every time you try to isolate a G2 player, it's a fool's errand, as we'd say in English, like, because you start out going like, right, well, Perkz must be the best AD carry, right, bot laner, because he plays mages, and a load of them don't do that. But then, as you just said there, if you didn't have super sick solo laners and an amazing jungle lane support, it's like, well, I didn't get anywhere at the end there. I thought I was fucking leading somewhere, and all of a sudden I went back in the maze. I'm trapped in it again. I can't get out. It's like, just keep going on. You are blessed, aren't you?
He's a mid laner. He's going to play all these mages better than fucking Rekkles is going to. Rekkles has just clicked auto attack for the last like 10 years of his life. Like, come on.
Should have offlaned a bit more.
Better on these champions.
Yeah. Should have offlaned a bit more.
I mean, I'm just saying. I don't think that's ever up for debate. That's why
Listen,
Youngbuck didn't even entertain that debate. Just straight
Listen-
up, yeah, he's better on mages, fuck it.
Yeah, fair enough. Listen, Abdul plays 4 roles and get the top of screen solo queue anytime he wants. All I'm saying is, any of you guys want to step your game up, just go ahead and do that.
He also only plays shit like Kassadin, Malzahar, Oriana, basically my handless champion pool in the mid lane, and then top lane he only plays Fiora, Jax, Camille, and then jungle he plays like just one jungler at a time. It's normally Hecarim or Graves. Like,
I mean, you know the most
his
famous
champ pool is
champion.
not Giga.
Do you know the most famous champion of Abdul?
Fuck yeah, TF.
Twisted
thank you.
Fate. He takes over the
I
whole
knew I was
map with
fucking
it.
forgetting
Like,
one.
you
Yes,
know.
yes, but like if you look at his accounts, it's like 70% of the games on TF, and then the rest are like on.
Yeah, sure.
Just name. Like he doesn't have a super giga champ pool, is all I'm saying.
Okay.
It's like, so it's a bit. I just feel like he's always been some gold standard people like compared to, and he's monster smart about the game. But like it's not because of champ pool. I don't want to.
No. By the way, I would actually say his decision making is probably the best thing.
Yeah.
Like, that's the mad thing. He really is like a jungler who plays mid lane, basically. So anyway, this is a whole different discussion because it's a player that doesn't even fucking play competitively. So it's not even about if anyone watches LCK, is it? It's like, does anyone watch obscure Korean solo queue VODs that are subtitled and try and figure out what a guy's doing? Probably not, right? Let's do the Origin discussion then. So here's the thing I want to say at the beginning of the Origin discussion is, this might sound weird, just cause a whole bunch of the Origin players have been very good players and have been in top teams and are all respected. I know, actually, nobody tends to single out one player and say he's the problem, blah, 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 etc. Just by default, they actually seem to get away in that sense. I do feel like as a team, they are getting away with bad play because they're a team where the storyline always goes like this. Like I said, no one will criticize the players, in part because everyone thinks, well, next split they could all be top players again. They could be super sick. Like, they're probably not going to be done, are they? Then secondly, there's the whole angle that everyone relies on the logic of, since they've got all these good players, it doesn't matter what they do now. In the playoffs, if they get there, they'll just be really good. It'll all just suddenly transform and turn around. And obviously that can happen. There've been teams, maybe even Youngbuck was a coach of one of them, that in the split don't look as good, but then they come to the best of fives and they do an amazing job and they win out and they level up their game somehow. Obviously a Mithy team as well. But you have to kind of look with harsh, cold light of day at the losses Origin has, and they are clearly quite a flawed team at the moment, right?
Origin is very peculiar because they're kind of the thing that G2 stands against. They're really good if you give them A plus B, and then they play the same thing over and over, and they get execution right. But the moment there comes a variable they're not ready for, their system crumbles completely. It's also, I know, 2 players on the team that have really hard time playing against matchups they don't know, really. That they shut down and they suddenly don't get pressure anymore. So if the game goes expected, I still think they have really good fundamentals in the way that if they get a lead and they're in the position they want to be, they can play out their games correctly. But if anything unexpected comes out, let's say the player who is supposed to have pressure and misplaces lane suddenly doesn't have pressure, Cold doesn't know how to path anymore. I mean, it's a bit exaggerated, right? But I think that's basically how it goes, and just these individual misplays happened a lot more this split, where they're not getting the value they expected to get. So that's where they look worse. So it's kind of odd to say that I think they have good fundamentals, but at the same time, they're like so bad at reacting to new things.
Okay. What do you think, Youngbuck?
I think they are a team that in spring were really good around one certain thing, and that is playing around the winning bot lanes, drafting winning bot lanes. So looking specifically at Draven, pushing in waves early and playing around it very well with a jungler. And now they don't seem to play around bot lane anymore, but they don't really seem to play around any lane anymore. So I think Origin has the quality of players to play around top lane or mid lane. They just happen to choose in spring to basically play around bot lane for the most part and free up Mithy. And I think that's because Mithy is probably the main voice in the team and shot calling for the most part, so it's probably the right approach. It just seems that right now they're shying away from that, but I don't really see what else they are playing for in the meantime. It just feels like they're slowly getting rolled over when you play against them.
Okay. Actually, I'll correct that. To be fair, I guess the 2 players who do actually get the flame is the jungle and the support. Like, those are the players who tend people to criticize. So I guess the question is this, Veteran. The big knock on Origin for me is when we were talking about the other teams, Splyce, Schalke, it actually even makes sense the way they play. Like, I can't even blame necessarily the coaching staff of Schalke. I don't know what I would do with those players. Like, they're probably doing roughly what I would probably try and do if I tried to maximize my chances to win in the context of who else is in the league. But But the difference is, as he alluded to there, if you look at the players they have, and especially the laners they have, in theory, they should be able to play wherever they want. So it makes it even worse if you have a losing record in that sense.
I mean, so I think that they played and swing hard around bot because they identified as Youngbuck and Fnatic also identified, give it everyone the credit, obviously, that bot lane was actually a really, really good lane to play around. Back then, you could play very hard for it. I do agree, though, that like the other thing he said in terms of they were very good at like pushing out waves and playing with the waves. Like I think that they were phenomenal at playing early game relative to the waves. Like absolutely phenomenal. I thought that they were actually the best in Europe about this. They don't really do that anymore, and they don't really have a consistent identity in terms of what their jungle priority is. And I mean, in terms of like what their jungle is playing towards, they literally started changing like week by week after Rift Rivals, and even during Rift Rivals. Just at Rift Rivals, I think they were getting away with it. It feels to me like Origen are a team that tried to improve their early game to try to like match teams like G2 that can just, the moment you misstep, intuitively will be there and fucking murder you, like they did to Origen at the start of this split. The problem is that their mid game was actually a problem before, but it wasn't so much of a problem when they just smothered you like fuck in the early game. They would get caught in transition phase a lot. They would make some improper skirmish calls. This was a swing split flaw. They haven't tried to work on that in Summer. Instead, they tried to correct an area where they were really, really good on. And now when they decide, okay, we really need to make playoffs, we need to play really well, they played a really strong early game again versus Splyce. That was like a game that I was used to seeing from them from last split, from early on in this split before Rift Rivals. And then mid-game comes around, and they go for like the mid dive while Herald is being taken. When Herald's just being taken, they get collapsed on. They're getting caught doing dumb things in the mid game again. It's not consistent again. They haven't worked on that. They haven't given themselves time to work on that because they've been trying to fix something that wasn't fucking broken this entire time. Youngbuck and PJ alluded to like that they have some internal issues or something. I could see maybe they had some disagreements on how they were playing out the early game, but like it blows my mind the way Origen has gone, because Origen should be coming in looking like a strong contender to G2 if they had fixed their mid game by this point. And it doesn't even look to me like they tried. They tried to fix something that wasn't broken instead, and I really don't like that.
What do you think of that angle of like the jungle angle? Because obviously this is one where, again, by the way, just to reference back to the whole Broxah debate, obviously jungle is objectively outside of the game the hardest role to know, because, for example, you don't know whether he said to do that or whether he was told to do that. So you don't even know how to blame the player properly, really. Whereas it's a bit more obvious if the laner fucks up a trade or doesn't understand his waves. Some of that's a little bit more. So what do you think of the cold angle to it? Because basically that's like a very famous... It'd be one of the Elitists United bingo spots, by the way, as Veteran says that Cold should just go back to the style he was doing at the beginning of the split. If he did, they'd be great, and then it'd fix a lot of the shit. So, obviously, I'm always interested, because the obvious question, I don't have Cold here now, sadly, he came on actually when they were pretty good, would be, why the fuck don't you do that? Or is Veteran full of shit? So, in lieu of that, you'll have to be the stand-in here for Cold. Give me your thoughts, Youngbuck.
Can I go toilet break first?
Yeah. We'll just keep talking while you do it.
You can just like trash talk me while I'm in the toilet, it's all good.
Do you think the jungle aspect is significant?
I do think so. I think in spring, Colt and Mithy were the players we were actually most afraid of when we were going up against Origen, just because they move around the map quite well. Now, in summer, I can say that we can attribute one of our wins thanks to Mr. Colt, who could end the game in 7 minutes and decided not to do so. So thank you, Mr. Colt. And I don't know if they have internal issues, but if they do, maybe somewhere on the bot side of the map. Because like I mentioned before, they were good at one specific thing and they're not doing it anymore, and it doesn't make much sense. And Cole is still really good at pushing out, like being at the right time in the right place in terms of pushing out waves, covering waves for counter ganks. But they had this element of playing around the minion waves, around the bot lane minion waves that was so set up, it was very difficult to prepare for. Like we fell for it like 10 times. They did the same thing over and over again. They would push in the third or fourth wave. From the game start, they would base, let it slow push towards you, and then the moment that then you have to push out as your bot lane, and guess who's there? Always Cold is always there, ready to gank, and AD carry like Patrick would have a small item advantage, and they would just kill you and take over the game. They would either force you to not take the minions, or they would kill you if you try to contest because they had an item advantage. So they just seemed to completely stop playing around that, and that was their one strength, their one weapon that I felt like they had over every other team in the LEC.
Okay, what do you think, Grabbz?
Alluding to him saying correctly that not playing around bot anymore, maybe that's the same thing that, yes, they're good at pushing out waves of cold, but there is a team, they don't create anything really. That's what it feels like. At least for us, going into Origen games, we just know if there's a wave to be pushed out, cold is probably going to be there, so don't die to it, it's fine. And besides that, there's so much happening. So beforehand, maybe as Champo, I don't know, when they have the Draven, maybe Patrick gets a solo kill, or they play a bit more aggressive and they get those small leads that they can snowball later on. And maybe, I don't know if there's quality or just confidence, which can also happen if you lose a streak, right? You don't go for those plays anymore and they don't create those small leads. And then it just becomes a farming game. But at the same time, there are some individual mistakes happening, which are rare for them, at least compared to Spring. Where then, instead of getting the small leads they all got small disadvantages. They have to climb out of them. And that's what I meant beforehand. I think they struggle with that because they see the comp, they know we should be strong here. If they suddenly aren't, they don't know how to progress from that point. And then the game slowly just plays out. They will fall further behind the gold and then suddenly lose the game. Of course, the different unlucky games against, for example, Rogue, where Prophet still played, and the one thing Prophet can do is flank. And they get flanked on and lose. And, also games where they could have won, but then one mistake explodes them out, right? But as I said, I just think they're playing too safe and they don't get those small leads that maybe Newjack or Patrick got in Spring still. And then again, they don't seem to know how to play out as a team if they don't on the exact spot they thought of beforehand in the draft.
Okay. Right, being as, when you earlier referenced when we were talking about upset, Patrick as one of the best AD carries as well in Europe, one of the players actually that, like I alluded to before, the jungle and the support are the two that get the flame mainly in Origin, it feels like. The difference is, in Spring, people did want Mithy on an all-pro list. They were the narrative was kind of great, look, he came back to Europe, fuck TSM, it was all TSM, he's actually a brilliant player again, it's all going to turn around, he's back, he's going to be a great shot caller, he's going to do great stuff in the game. What do you think, Youngbuck? You're a guy, obviously, who coached this guy and knows him and his philosophy on the game. What do you think of Mithy and Origen?
It depends on how many voices there are in the team, but I know he's going to be a main shot caller and he's extremely intelligent, both inside the game and outside the game. So he's also always has good personal relationships with his teammates. Is a fantastic shot caller, wants to play the game the perfect way. Which is kind of one of Origin's weaknesses, where they want to play perfect so that it's too slow for this meta and too predictable.
There's a great saying we have in English, which is the perfect is the enemy of the good.
That sounds about right.
Because basically, you shoot for pure perfection in a sense, and you actually might fuck up and not do the stuff that would just be good and win you the game, basically.
Yeah. So I think he fits in. You can fit him into any team as long as you have maybe a few very creative, out-of-the-box players that are maybe not as disciplined. So then you're looking at Fnatic and G2 players. You need personalities like Caps and Repo and Hilly. Well, it cannot be a support, right? And so MikyX. These people will make action happen all the time. I think he needs those kind of people around him, and he doesn't really have that. So that's probably one of the big reasons why he isn't shining. But I still think he's a player that can fit on any team and is still a big threat because he's the one usually moving around the map and making things happen, even though it's not really the way I think he envisions the game. But he's the guy who will randomly show up in top lane at 8 minutes and gank your top laner when you expect him to go somewhere through mid and then back to bot lane.
Well, one thing he alludes to there that's an interesting question to ask is that one of the problems I have with Origen, you might actually remember, Veteran, this was my initial criticism of the team when it was formed, is if I'm the general manager, looks like you did a very good job. You couldn't get all the best players, many of them are on Fnatic and on G2, and those teams were already the best teams, so you can't necessarily get those players. But in the context of, if you take those players off the table, they made a very good roster on paper. Each player, I can't really criticize much. Maybe I would have said I didn't rate Cold so highly. The rest of them, though, I'd all say all have potentially be very good players. But again, that's in isolation. Collectively, I actually said, if you remember, one of my problems with them as a team is I didn't think they had any player who could be the MVP of the LEC. And as much as everyone doesn't want to believe any team game is ever about an individual player, I think if you look at any team sport in the world, it's not a coincidence that they usually call the star player of the best team the best player. It's usually because superstar players can do extra things you can't do within a team system, if we're going to use the cursed word again. So is it the case, is there anything to it, that the laners of Origen are perhaps not playmakers, perhaps not proactive players, as a generalization?
The guy that everyone probably thought of when you said that was probably NateDOhDoubleG, who is a player who plays mid lane very, very well, but does have a reputation for maybe freezing a little too often, maybe going to trick the TF passive on the Wraith camp like one too many times when there could be other plays going on the map. I don't think that that's like necessarily the issue with Origen though. Like I mean, they've been really good with this roster, for example.
Sure.
Like, this has been a contender roster. This isn't a roster that has ever like lacked like MVP sub potential. I mean, obviously.
And did you have any of those players as a real MVP?
I mean,
No,
yeah, I think I was yelling about Mithy at the time, though.
As the MVP of the league?
Well, if he came... Okay, but the problem is that G2 is in the fucking league, so I always had to put a fucking G2 member there.
Okay,
like,
that is an asterisk.
I believe
I'll give you
it
that
was
one.
Jankos. So it's a bit weird, but if they had won the entire league, then either Mithy or... I mean, probably Mithy, but maybe Cold for me would have been like the MVP. And the thing about Cold is, again, I thought that their early game system was almost perfect. And yeah, I mean, Grabbz is kind of right that they don't really like make. I disagree with the phrasing "make things happen." Like, I think they make a lot happen around the map, but I don't think they abuse mistakes like intuitively. Like, they don't have the ability to recognize that we go in on this in the same way that any of Grabbz players have. Like, that's probably also the X factor.
They're just a little risk averse then.
Yeah, like I think that's probably I mean, I don't even view that as risk averse. I just view that as Grabbz' guys don't view it as a risk. They just recognize it's a situation where they fucked up and we can now pound them into the ground, and then everyone else will pound into the ground as well. Like, I'm not so sure it's a risk averse thing. I just don't think they're as good as G2's players. I really honestly think it just comes down to that. But the Mithy thing, what Youngbuck was saying, yeah, they did unlock Mithy a lot last play, and there were a lot of teams that suffered for that. But I mean, like, the game versus Fnatic, they had the perfect draft to go back to just playing hard around bot. How the fuck is Hylissang ever supposed to win? He's playing Rakan against Draven Leona. How's he ever supposed to get unlocked? And then Cold spends the whole game topside. Like, my mind was exploding, like, that whole game. It made no sense to me. It's just a team that's lost all the cohesion that made them really good in the first place and did make them look like contenders in the first place. They did get leads against G2. They threw those in the mid game. The mid game was always very much their issue. That was what they absolutely had to fix, and they just haven't bothered doing that. And if they did, then again, NateDOhDoubleG could even look like an MVP candidate, because the way he plays side lane is still, if he ever gets that fucking fire at this point, is still like the best in Europe. Like, he's so consistent on that in a way that Caps is not necessarily as consistent on. Alfari has always been a really strong top laner. He's always outputted a lot of pressure. When he is maintaining like a wave freeze, he fucking does it in your face if he can. Like, he's very, very, very good at this. Every single player on that team is talented. They just might not all be as intuitive, killer instinct hungry as like G2's players. But I don't think that means it would lack an MVP. And I don't think that means it was ever like suddenly not contesting for like the top spot, because it was at one point, and we have to like remember that. I just think they've lost their way.
I mean, put it this way. If I showed you the rosters coming into this split of Schalke and Origen and said one of these has a losing record, I don't think any of you picks the right one.
Yeah, like, I'd obviously say Schalke. Every time. I don't know. I mean, you're talking to like probably the biggest Origen fan that is like not in Origen.
That's
like,
true.
That's the problem. Like, I really loved this roster when it was.
I mean, you think they're better than they do?
Probably now, yeah. Probably they're fucking.
That's
like,
the joke.
They've probably like given up in their heads, like, it was all a fluke. We were never in the first place. So still sat there like, no, you were good.
They need to bring you in as a cheerleader. Yeah, exactly. You need to come in. Basically, I'm not Origen. Have you ever seen this movie, Veteran? It's quite a famous one, but it's kind of like a niche movie. It's called Glengarry Glen Ross. and it's a movie about people who are salesmen who go door to door. And obviously that type of a gig, oftentimes the product you're selling isn't a quality product, so otherwise it'd be in the shop, wouldn't it? That's the way you sell things. So if you're going door to door, half of it basically is you got to get your Weldon Green hat on, and you've got to convince them that they need the product, because you've got to create the reason they need it, right? So in this movie, because a whole bunch of them are suffering and not doing very well as salesmen, there's this epic scene. You can look it up on YouTube. I believe it's called The Best Scene Ever or something. Put in Gary Glenn Ross best scene, and this character played by Alec Baldwin comes in, and he's been sent from the head office, and he's basically the guy who comes in to give them the big speech. Like, he tells them all basically, you're all pieces of shit, like, you're all worthless, you're gonna fail, this is only for winners, like there's all these classic lines, like winners clause or whatever, like ABC, always be closing the deal and stuff. And he basically tells them, like, I'm just gonna give you like a deal here, like, whoever comes top 2 is gonna win these prizes, everyone else is fired, like, get the fuck out. Like, you need to do that with Origen, basically. You need to just be like, right, we're keeping 3 players for next year, this is how you're gonna play. After whoever finishes last, you just get the bullet, I'm afraid, and we move on from there. We can bring in other players. Listen, I've got Upset on fucking speed dial. I can get him in here tomorrow if I need. You've got all the players. I know Inspired personally. I can get him in this door tomorrow, Cold, if you don't watch your shit. So then you need to go. If you do that speech, maybe that wakes them up out of it. Maybe that's the. Because actually, something you said earlier. Go on.
I mean, my analogy would be that, like, I finally know what all those KT fans felt like, Like, it should work. It's like, it's so fucking free, and it was even working, and somehow they fuck it up. Like, I was never a KT fan. Even, like, I liked KT, I was never, like, a KT fan. I was never, like, mortified when they were doing poorly. But this is, like, it fucking hurts to see how badly Origen are doing that relative to how they were playing. Like, I've never known this before, but now I understand what all the KT fans were doing. So that would have been my analogy. But yeah, like, go on. All
right, one last thing. One last topic. So this has been pretty good. It's been pretty long. Right, one last thing I want to ask about was when you said earlier that, like, the rumblings in the scene are that there's some sort of internal issues.
Oh,
within
yeah.
the team.
Yeah, he said on TGL.
Like, obviously, they're not going to name who they are and what the exact problem is, but is the implication, like, 2 players don't get along or 2 players don't agree with how the other one plays? Is it something along these lines?
Is it a question about Origen, or?
Yeah.
The question is,
I don't know if there's any internal issues. It just looks like it because the way they fell apart doesn't make any sense whatsoever.
Right.
Okay.
Because when Veteran was describing that there,
differently at TGL, but sure.
Yeah, you did phrase it differently at TGL.
Oops.
Maybe he just teased it there, and then they were like, "Well, we haven't got any time for that." He was like, "Whew, there we go, right?" And then when he comes on this show, when we could talk for like 1 hour in depth, he's like, "You know what? Did I say internal issues? I just meant, sometimes the players aren't always on the same page. And, every team is like that, blah, 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 Fnatic, something G2. And so, yeah, they're good. I like them. I appreciate them. No, the question basically was this. The reason that I thought of that is because when Veteran says about that specific game, well, if the 2 main shot callers in the team and the 2 players that actually Veteran was putting forward as MVPs the previous split, it looks like they're not on the same page. They're the shot callers, Veteran. They could have decided themselves to make the play you're talking about happen.
Or Hylissang would be like 0-8 in that fucking game. Like, how the fuck do they not just abuse Draven the owner bot in that matchup? It blows my mind every time. They're clearly not on the same page.
Because it's like H2K were forgiven. What happened is, like, Mithy told Cold, like, don't ever come to my fucking lane again. And now they're literally doing a solo queue move where you've got 20 minutes left. It's like, you're probably going to lose, but it's like, at least I'm not going to fucking help that teammate. If I lose, everyone has to lose.
Accurate or not? I'm not.
No, of course not. Of course not. That would never happen in a team.
No.
This video was kindly supported by Patrick Ribeiro, Penguin Off 9, Dean Tanglis, Andreas Snazore Westerlund, Fat Guy got 24 ADR in an online qualifier, Lee Chaolan, Blunt Smoking Anus Destroyer, JDubs, Chi Mao, Tobias Bernasconi, NateDOhDoubleG, Alexander Rao, Kolja G, and as always, special thanks goes out to Jerky's Minion. Now, do you want to suggest a topic or a guest for some of my content? Obviously, I have quite a varied output. Do you want to ask me a question for my monthly video AMA? Maybe you want teasers, see who the guests are on my next shows. Do you want to take part in a donator discussion with me about esports? Well, if so, put your money where your mouth is. Join the Scrilluminati today. In the description box below, there's a Patreon link.